Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, living in this large, square, palatial, imperious Georgian-style mansion of mine, in a glorious tree-lined neighbourhood in Seattle, where all the audacious, pretentious-looking stately homes stand up loftily on what many might politely consider conceited ceremony, pompous, proud, regal and assertive, as if not afraid or even remotely reluctant to take positions of prominence in this neighbourhood, complemented by a great deal of space, with sprawling back and front yards that look like sumptuous parklands, boasting fabulously manicured gardens, sculptured hedges, rose bushes ablaze with resplendent colours, for nothing in this neighbourhood is remotely understated. Indeed, it would seem that every brick that graces and defines the very walls and foundations of these grandiose dwellings is smugly self-assured. If I didn't know any better, I would almost say the flaunting mansions in our neighbourhood are conspicuously vainglorious, bloated with pride, overbearingly egotistical, unabashedly affected by their prominent grandeur and ostentatious intrigue. If these theatrical, extravagant houses were people, you might consider them haughty, puffed up, prideful, the Marie Antoinettes of the property world, if you like, cluelessly oblivious about how the other half actually lives. The elaborate ornamental mansions here are more than a little eager to show off their perfect symmetry that's based on the golden ratio, embodying perfect features like large airy windows, swanky shutters, grand elegant entranceways embellished with pediments, arches and columns, their smooth graceful lines so aesthetically pleasing to the eye. I have lived in my self-indulgent, resplendent mansion for easily over 40 years now, with my old world vintage antiques, along with my big fat affected white cat Cynthia for company, who needless to say is possibly the snootiest, most condescending cat on the block, who looks down patronisingly on all her furry counterparts in the neighbourhood, perceiving that she is of far superior breeding and lineage than the rest of them put together. Even my vet commented on her snooty la-di-da attitude once. "Why, I do believe Cynthia has a very high opinion of herself," he had said to me, in a rather amused voice. He wasn't wrong about that either. I've seen her gazing at her own reflection in the downstairs mirror, and I'm in no doubt that she sees herself as rather aristocratic and terribly, terribly posh. Perhaps this grandiose mansion of mine has gone straight to her head and rather affected her. She certainly thinks she owns it. I imagine she's got carried away with her self-importance. It's rather ironic, really, given I found her abandoned on the side of the road, a very sorry bedraggled sight, infested with fleas, in a grotty downtrodden part of downtown Seattle, near a cluster of bins that smelt of putrid garbage and was littered with drug addicts' needles. Needless to say, I brought her home, but she's conveniently forgotten about all that, and about her less than savoury roots, and that her so-called illustrious bloodline may in fact be an infestation of some of Seattle's most hardened criminalised street cats. I have a big confession to make, which certainly doesn't come easy from a woman like myself, who likes to tuck her feelings away and never wear them on her sleeve. But I hasten to admit for the last 8 years it has been repetitively lonely, wallowing under these huge high-ceilinged walls of my home, in this endless sea of space, a massive box of so many rooms. I'm approaching my mid-80s. My own children would love nothing better for me than to abandon this home of mine, which they think has got far too big for me now. But I would feel like a cheating wife or husband if I did such a thing, as nonsensical as that may sound to you. Besides, over the years, I've grown exceedingly attached to my home. This morning, as I'm drinking my Earl Grey tea out of the finest bone china, I always make my tea a ceremonious event, rather like the Japanese do. I emphatically believe it should be drunk out of the finest bone china to maximise all the benefits of the tea leaves. I was listening to the radio. Something the host is saying grabs my attention, almost as if I'm being given a serendipitous nudge by the hands of Mother Fate herself, who appears to be smiling down on me, beckoning me to embrace change, to welcome her into my life like a fairy godmother of expeditious opportunity. We have Margaret Dalloway on the show this morning. Now, she's a world-renowned therapist who can help you with any issues you may have in regards to your personal life. Now, I just want to say thank you, Margaret, for coming in this morning. It's a pleasure. I'm delighted to be here. Well, first on the line, we have Jason from Overlake in Redmond. Hello, Jason. How can I help you? Well, you know, Margaret, there's no easy way of saying this, but I'm utterly bored of my life. My wife was earning more money than me. It was decided I'd become a stay-at-home husband. We didn't want to hire a nanny. We wanted to be actively involved in our children's lives. I'm finding staying at home overwhelmingly drab. Who knew it would be so hard? The children are not easy to take charge over. I've had to get to grips with managing the home. I'm so lonely and incredibly bored. I know the screaming kids ought to be entertainment enough, but they're certainly not. I'm dreading every day the moment I get up. I'm gagging for adult companionship and company. My wife, when she gets home, is so shattered she passes out on the sofa, falling fast asleep. She's not fun to be around. Her job completely sucks the life out of her, but she enjoys it, so that's a bonus, I suppose. How can I make my life less lonely, Margaret? Well, Jason, I completely understand exactly where you're coming from. It makes perfect sense to me that you're lonely and bored. You can be in a complete crowd of people and be lonely, you know. It isn't easy being a stay-at-home father. Anyone can appreciate the challenges that you embrace every day, rather reluctantly, I'm sure. So what do you do to change things? You make changes. If you're lonely and bored, you need to do something to redeem or rectify the situation. It's not as challenging as it may at first appear. You're lonely, Jason, as every day your repetitive humdrum routines are identical. If you don't change the monotony of those routines, you're going to get exactly the same results. You need to do something different. Perhaps you should get a nanny for a few hours twice a week to relieve the dullness of watching over the children. Or perhaps you should swap child-minding duties with another mother. Go out and do something you thoroughly enjoy, like joining a pottery class. Go bowling. Meet friends in a bar. But you can't affect any change if you don't make change. You can't expect your life to be different. You're the one that has to direct the reins of your own life. Same destination, same result. Do you get my drift? Thank you very much, Margaret. What you've said makes perfect sense to me. I do need to make different choices. As it happens, I know a lady who might be very keen to look after my children for a few hours a couple of times a week, if I do the same for her, which would free up some spare time for me. I think that's a grand idea. I will certainly apply it. Good. I'm so glad to hear that. Good luck, Jason. I listen attentively to the therapist's wise words. I know they make perfect sense to me. If I want to make some significant changes in my monochromatic, prosaic life, then I'm actively going to have to do something different to initiate change, to relieve me of the unvarying dull blandness of every single passing day. I've been climbing out of my bed daily, talking to my antiques and my cat Cynthia, wondering why I feel so isolated and lonely in my dauntingly big mansion. It was different when my two best friends, Marjorie and Rose, were alive, but they've since passed away, which happens a lot more frequently when you get to my age. So I'm left with a stunning, less than pleasant realization that I'm truly alone in the world, like a companionless outcast, which, let's just say, isn't exactly a great feeling. It doesn't help, of course, that my daughter and son are both now living in Boston, after having gone to university there all those long years ago. They loved it there so much that they never left the place. I don't see them terribly often. I do miss them an awful lot, but they have lives of their own to lead, which is something I've learnt to respect. Besides, I'm far too polite to ever be intrusive or invasive in their lives. But from time to time, I do thoroughly enjoy visiting my grandchildren. If I want to transform my life, I'm going to do it now, before I change my mind. I could quite easily chicken out, as I can be quite gutless at times. You see, I'm resolutely set in my ways, obstinately headstrong, and peritinaciously steadfast. Some people describe me as reticent, demure, reserved, and very prim and proper. I was once asked by a perfect stranger if I was a headmistress of an ostentatious, very strict girls' school, of which name I choose not to mention, which, let's just say, did not exactly come as a compliment to me from where I was standing. I remember studying myself studiously in the mirror after that comment, trying to see myself through the eyes of a perfect stranger. To be honest, I didn't exactly like what I was seeing. I was examining my reflection critically in the mirror, conspicuously aware how gravity over the years has taken its toll on the scaffolding of my somewhat jaded human bodysuit. Let's just say the generous spidery wrinkles and crinkly furrows on the sides of my eyes are becoming like deep crevices. The jiggling jowls on my jawline noticeably crumpled. Aside from the obvious, did I really look that formidable, aloof, unapproachable, I wondered? Surely not. But the wizened reflection staring back at me in the mirror looked very serious, intense, standoffish. In truth, if I'm being downright candid with you, I think I look soberly austere, rather frosty. If I was auditioning for a part in a play to perform as the stiff, unfriendly matron, I would have probably been given the part on the spot, without even needing to act. The producer would possibly ask me to just act like myself and be done with it. I recall telling my best friend Marjorie, when she was alive, which wasn't too long ago actually, that I'd been asked if I was a headmistress by a perfect stranger. She found that hilariously funny. Actually, she was in stitches about it. Let's just say I didn't share in her humour. "You do look a bit stuffy," she admitted. "I mean, look at you. You always wear tweed skirts, cashmere sweaters, sensible hush-puppy shoes, tiny strings of pearls, and your grey hair is pinned so tightly behind your ears in that formidable-looking bun, giving you that quintessential severe, no-nonsense, astringent look that can make you seem stringently unapproachable. I never told you this before, but now that you want me to be forthright with you, even my grandson was afraid of you when he first met you. He said you looked cross all the time, like a bad-tempered, snappy, cantankerous turtle. It doesn't help wearing those very round, opaque glasses of yours. They make your eyes look, well, very shrewd and owl-like, as if you're about to pounce on your prey and tear it apart with your sharp talons." "Wow, Marjorie, thanks for telling me how it is," I say gingerly. The cold, hard, brutal truth is certainly not easy to hear. I'm not quite sure how to take it, actually. I feel as if you'd thrown a bucket of ice-cold water over my face. I had no idea I looked so hard-faced. You never told me your grandchild was actually frightened of me. That doesn't make me feel good at all. What can I do to look more affable? What would you do if you were wearing my shoes?" Marjorie looks at me intently. "For a start, I'd never ever wear those dreadfully drab, overly practical hush-puppy shoes. They're far too sensible. Very old ladyish. You need to wear some pumps that are a little bit more glamorous, with a touch of je ne sais quoi that makes you look stylish and fashionable. Then another thing you could do is to practice smiling more to soften your expression. You do tend to have a kind of stony look to your face. Loosen your lips a little. She looks at me earnestly through her kind eyes. Then there's this tight, restrictive hairstyle of yours. The grey hair. No, it's simply got to go. Maybe go for a soft auburn shade. Get rid of the tight bun. Get your hair cut and styled in a short, chic, loose hairstyle. It'll certainly flatter your face more. And for God's sake, Shirley, get rid of those god-awful glasses. I can't stand them. Find a swanky, sophisticated pair of glasses to wear. Instead, from a contemporary designer maybe, in a bright pink colour to brighten your face, show off your pretty blue eyes. I know a great optometrist you can go to. They have phenomenal designer glasses there. They're like works of art in their own right. I'll take you there if you like. It hadn't been easy, but I'd taken Marjorie's advice, albeit a little hesitantly. But I'd be damned if someone was ever going to confuse me for a headmistress again. I had been surprised how much better people had responded to me. I found even shop assistants were less reluctant to serve me. I got more genuine smiles from people. Dare I say, even more appreciative looks from elderly gentlemen. The latter was rather a surprise to me, as gone were the days that I thought I would turn heads. It had been rather an adjustment to wear the pink eclectic glasses, but after receiving many compliments about them and being stopped in the street multiple times with explanations from perfect strangers like, "Oh my God, I love your glasses! Where on earth did you get them? They're to die for!" they gradually began to grow on me. And as for the soft auburn hairstyle, it did at least remove about 10 years off my face and made me feel younger and more sprightly. Suffice to say, Cynthia, my cat, did notice the transformations in me physically. She gave me a funny, disparaging look as if to say, "What the hell have you done to yourself? I don't know why you bother. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear." "Thanks a lot, Cynthia," I said to her. Now I was desirous to make some pronounced changes, like the inspirational therapist had so sagaciously suggested. I had to do something different to effect change. I wanted to remove the loneliness from my life, as efficiently as a red wine stain off a cream carpet. One of the ways to start was to advertise one of my rooms in my home for rent, as that would mean that I would be inviting more human life into my home, and that had to be a good thing. I quickly tapped the details down in my cell phone to advertise a room for board in my home, before I changed my mind. Over the years, my son Edward was constantly going on and on at me about downsizing, but I'd never listened. "Mum, this great big mansion of yours is far too big for a woman on her own," he had explained to me, but he didn't understand. No one did. I didn't want to abandon my home. It was an extension of me. My home was like a friend to me. It carried the memories of when my husband was alive. It absorbed every laugh, every joke, every smile, every tear, every happy or sad word. And so our energy had become one with our home, and I wasn't ready to let it all go, as it would rather be like saying goodbye to a large part of myself. The first respondent to my ad was a young lady called Alicia, who looked a little apprehensive and daunted when I first showed her around my property. The mansions in our neighbourhood can have that kind of disconcerting effect on people who live in the more modest parts of Seattle. But when you live in them for long enough, they're not half so intimidating as they first appear. The young woman is slim, about 5'4", with long dark hair, fair skin, and eyes that look as green as the ocean. She appears nervous and rather twitchy. It seems as if she's struggling to say something, as if she's overcome with a bashful hesitancy. Finally she spouts, "Are you sure you're letting out a room and board in your place for such a low rental?" she asks awkwardly, looking slightly uncomfortable. "It's just your home is so grand. You've got so many beautiful things in here. I mean, why are you asking such little rent?" "No, the rent is accurate," I say. "I'm not looking to charge an astronomical amount. I think the house is just too big for one person. Another human life living here will add energy to this place," I say. "That's what I'm looking for, life in this home." I can see the relief is washing over her face. "Oh, I thought there must have been a mistake in the ad. When the taxi driver dropped me here moments ago and saw the mansions in the neighbourhood, he did say if I was renting a room in this fancy place, that it would surely cost me an arm and a leg. This would suit me down to the ground, she tells me. To live here, I mean. For the last month I've been staying with my sister and her husband. Well, let's just say 3's a crowd. I've absolutely no furniture. Everything I own has been sold impulsively on my part. I know you've got to see lots of other people who've responded to the ads, but I do beg you to consider me. I know this is very presumptuous and pushy of me, but my dad always used to say to me, if you want something bad enough, you need to go that extra mile to get it. He would say you need to have some real chutzpah. It's a Jewish word for brazen audacity or cheek, if you like. Stepping out of your comfort zone, so to speak. But I would love to live here. I would respect all your things, I promise. I'm an excellent cook as well. Well, so I've been told. I'm tidy and I'm not bad company either, even if I do say so myself. I've got lots of good references. I have a job in town, and I can even show you my bank statement if you want to check my financial records. I'm honest, reliable, and loyal. I watch her hesitancy grow, but then her face relaxes, and she blurts out, you see, I was living in a loft conversion. Well, me and my boyfriend, we made it so beautiful. We filled it with so many antiques. We painstakingly frequented garage sales and antique shops together, looking for the best deals we could possibly find. We transformed our home into a gorgeous sanctuary. We sanded, restored, and sometimes reupholstered everything we bought. I think even you, with your phenomenal taste and fabulous style, would have been impressed. It really looked amazing. Then my boyfriend, well, his name's Blaine, he told me he was going to go away for the weekend on his own, but when he came back on the Monday after that weekend, he told me he was going to pack up everything and leave. He wanted to go exploring around North America with his backpack, doing odd jobs in different states, to raise extra money to support his ongoing carefree lifestyle. He wanted to break from our mainstream lives, to feel free and unrestrained, to live like the wild horses do. Well, that's how he explained it to me anyway. I asked him why he wanted to do this crazy, nonsensical thing. He told me that the challenges of daily life were seriously getting him down. He loathed his job. He hated his scathing boss. He'd had quite enough. He wanted to find himself, whatever that's supposed to mean. He was desirous to get up close and personal to nature. I said to him that giving up our loft conversion was a huge deal. We'd injected time, money and energy into the space. But he said he didn't care about anything anymore. He needed to get away. That was what mattered to him. Now, I love Blaine so very much. From the moment I met him, I knew he was the one for me. So when he went away for that weekend, I decided to sell everything, all the furnishings, every last thing we'd bought together, everything we'd sanded and transformed and repolished. You name it, we'd done it all. It was blood, sweat and tears without exaggeration. I got someone to legally rent out our loft conversion, signing a lease for over a year. On reflection, I really should have let out the place fully furnished, but I guess I wasn't thinking properly. When my boyfriend returned to our loft, he says to me, "Where is everything? What the heck have you done to this place?" I tell him, "I'm coming with you. I love you so much. I've given everything up for you, so that I can come on this voyage of self-discovery with you." He says to me, "I'm sorry, Alicia. You misunderstood me. I want to go on this journey exclusively on my own. It's nothing personal, but that's the whole point of this exercise. I don't want you coming with me." I was completely devastated. I said, "Does this mean we've broken up for good? Is it over between us?" He said he wasn't sure. He couldn't answer that question, but I must just move on with my life regardless. He wouldn't want to hold me back. Alicia suddenly bursts into tears. She sniffs. "I must apologize. Look at me. I'm blabbing. It was just so unfair. I mean, how could he do this to me? I mean, I gave up so much for him. I was willing to give up my whole life, to abandon everything we'd worked so hard to acquire. And he didn't even want me to come along with him. Have you any idea how lonesome that makes me feel?" "Now you sit down, dear," I say to the young woman, escorting her into my kitchen. "How about I make you a nice sweet hot cup of tea, in my finest bone china? I'm old and wise enough, dear, to tell you that there really is no point in getting your heart broken over a man. I know it's not easy, and I know it hurts, but you deserve to be happy. I've learnt that in my old age, that happiness is terribly important. It really is." "But don't you see? I can't be happy without him. I really, really love him." "Happiness starts with us. We're responsible for our own happiness, you know. It's never someone else's responsibility to make us happy. People often forget that. And in regards to Blaine, maybe if he's given enough space and time to reflect on his life, he'll come to the realization that he misses you a lot. My father always used to say that if you love something, you must let it go. And if it comes back to you, it's meant to be yours. And if it doesn't, it's never meant to be. There's a very good chance Blaine will come back. Give him time, dear. He just needs time. I like that, she says, sniffing. That's really nice. I mean, the saying. I know a thing or two about loneliness living in a big house like this, with a cat that thinks she owns the place, and in my opinion, she thinks I'm the hired help. Let's just say my guess is you don't have a monopoly on loneliness, dear. I would hedge a bet Blaine will get lonely. He'll soon realise how much he misses you. I hand Alicia a cup of tea. She wipes away her tears. You know something? You're very nice. I do feel a whole lot better. In truth, I thought anyone owning a pretentious mansion like yours would be rather condescending and snooty. But you're amazingly kind. You're not like that at all. The only one of us that is condescending and snooty is Cynthia, my cat. She's the one you're going to have to watch. So you think he might get lonely, my boyfriend? She asks me again, the hope lighting up her sorrowful eyes. Yes, I do. I really do. Alicia's account. When I first laid my eyes on Shirley's grandiose mansion in the posh upmarket neighbourhood in Seattle, the kind of address that would make anyone proud, I thought there had to be a mistake. I'd given the taxi driver the address on a piece of paper, but this couldn't be it. Surely not. Are you sure you've got the right address? I asked him. I'd been expecting to behold a rather modest apartment, but not a mansion like this. Quite sure. You say you're hoping to rent here, he says, glancing at me over his shoulders. I will say this. Give my commiserations to your bank balance. As anyone staying in a place like this, it's not going to come cheap for them. I sigh. I quickly pass the ad on my cell phone for the taxi driver to examine. Look at this, I say. No way, he says to me, shaking his head indignantly. Reading the ad, he lets out a cynical, disbelieving laugh. No way at all. Someone is going to rent out their room for $400 a month in an area like this. You've got to be kidding. There's got to be a grievous mistake here. An oversight. It's possibly $4,000 more like, although even that is remarkably cheap for a place like this. I sigh warily. I retrieve my cell phone from the taxi driver. I thank him, pay him generously, tell him he can keep the change. I'm here now, I think. I might as well go and see what this room and board is all about. But I'm positive the taxi driver is absolutely right. All the houses in this grandiose neighbourhood are so ostentatious and ornate. No one living here could possibly rent a room out for only $400. Never in a million years. Nothing comes cheap living in a place like this. Even the air seems expensive to breathe here. Good luck, says the taxi driver, regarding me through kind brown eyes. I think he feels pitifully sorry for me, being so whimsically naive, I suspect. I hope, for your sake, the place is going as cheap as the advertisement suggests, but somehow I doubt it. I watch the taxi driver reverse. His rubber tyres glide down the long tree-lined street as his car rolls away. I glance up at the huge towering oak trees that are swaying in the wind, their boughs ablaze with rich golden leaves. There is a slight autumn chill in the air, and a scattering of golden leaves are bespeckling the pavement like gleaming golden coins, reminding me that wherever I look, I smell, feel, taste, and sense wealth. My heart begins to flutter in my chest. I feel decidedly nervous. My chest tightens. My anxiety level increases. I quickly open the elaborate, highly decorated black wrought iron gate. I walk down the sandstone path towards the grand steps, up each step. It's framed by an elaborate, graceful archway with baroque columns. I knock on the door. I hear a woman's sweet, gentle voice saying, "I'm coming! I'm coming!" An elderly woman opens the door. She has strawberry blonde hair, done in a very flattering, stylish cut. She has beautiful blue eyes, framed by a zooty bright pair of pink glasses. She's wearing a smart pair of white pants with a navy blue top with gold buttons on it and smart blue pumps. She looks like she ought to be on a yacht drinking champagne. She invites me into her house cordially. I'm overwhelmed. Her house is like walking into the Waldorf Astoria. It's the only way I can describe it to you. I once went to tea there with my great-aunt Angeline, and let's just say I was in awe of everything. This place is no different. There's high ceilings, twinkling ostentatious glass chandeliers, arched doorways, columns, sweeping staircases, marble floors, ornate rococo mirrors, exquisite huge works of art, fabulous antique furniture, sumptuous couches, tapestry chairs, and oakwood shelves filled with rare, highly sought-after antique leather-bound books, including limited editions. And then there are expensive-looking Persian rugs, in rich reds and golds, scattered resplendently over the parquet wooden flooring, or sometimes the marble floors, depending whereabouts you are in the house. It's in this poignant moment, as I stare at all this fabulous finery, that I disappointingly conclude that I have made a dreadful mistake. There has to be an awful blunder here. No way is there a room in this house going for such a cheap, ridiculous rent. I remember a similar mistake I made when I was a little girl, mistaking a to let sign for believing it meant a sign for a toilet. It embarrassed me, having to ask for where the toilet was, and hearing the building manager telling me, "Sorry, little girl, there is no toilet here. That sign says to let." I'm anxious to address the issue of the rent, but I have to ask, and I do. When the old lady who calls herself Shirley tells me that the room and board is really only for $400, I feel as if I've hit the jackpot. But I know in my heart that there are going to be other hopeful, eager responders to this ad. But how can I serendipitously persuade her to pick me and choose me over and above my competition? I figure, what have I got to lose? I finally tell her all about Blaine, and why I'm in this unfortunate predicament that I find myself in. Why I'm unable to live in my loft conversion, which I rented out for an entire year. Why I had no furniture to my name after selling it all. And why my boyfriend Blaine abandoned me to find himself in the American wilderness. I hadn't expected to burst into tears, but ironically, after I opened my heart to this unassuming character, she was genuinely kind and concerned, soothing me with a hot cup of sweet tea. Her calming, sagacious, reassuring words were dappled with such wisdom. She offered me a measure of hope. In a second I was uplifted from feeling hopeless to feeling hopeful. Shirley is that kind of woman. It's a pleasure to hang around her. She's genuinely so wholesome and warm-hearted. Not a toffee-nosed, haughty snob like you would have expected her to be. I'm pleasantly surprised about that. Better still, she told me she'd made up her mind, and I was to have the room and board that she had advertised. I asked her why she wasn't going to interview the other responders. She told me candidly that she liked me. She thought we'd get on quite nicely, and that the house needed more energy living within its walls. I think I know why she's rented the place. I don't think she would care if I paid her no rent at all. You can see money has never been an issue a day in her life. I think the old lady's lonely. She has a hankering for some company. I love old people, but I like her in particular. I think she's reserved and self-effacing, but dignified and graceful. I think I could grow quite fond of her. I thought she was joking about her cat Cynthia being a snob, but let's just say she wasn't kidding at all. The cat really has a haughty superiority, and I swear she looked down on me when she saw me. It's like she can smell my middle-class roots, finds me not blue-blooded enough to acquire occupancy in this grand mansion. But tough titty, Cynthia. Whether you like it or not, I'm moving in. On the day I moved into Cynthia's mansion, look at me, I'm talking as if the mansion belongs to the cat. Correction, on the day I moved into Shirley's mansion, she really made me feel incredibly welcome. And the bedroom I'm occupying is truly like a ravishing suite you'd expect to hire in the Waldorf Astoria when booking the honeymoon suite. And I'm not joking either. All this for $400. It seems too good to be true. The room is decorated in rose, greens and golds, with fleur-de-lis designs, and looks like a bedroom you would expect to find in the movie production Downton Abbey. It's got that period, ostentatious, palatial splendour to it. And there's a king-size, ornately carved four-poster bed with a mattress that is so incredibly comfortable. If you sink back on it, you're quite literally going to fall asleep at once. I truly am living in the lap of luxury. But Shirley, she's been so kind to me. It's been over 6 months now, and I've lived with Shirley all this time. We've grown incredibly fond of each other. Shirley has become like a grandmother figure in my life. I've been so happy living here, and I no longer feel intimidated by living in such luxurious circumstances. It grows on you rather too fast, I think. I spend a lot of my time with Shirley, laughing, talking, and eating together. We go out frequently. She takes me shopping on numerous occasions, and we eat lunches together at fabulous restaurants. Of course, she never took my $400 rent in the first place, for she never wanted any of it. Shirley has bought me clothes, we've gone to spas, nail salons, hairdressers together, and I realised that all Shirley really wanted was a companion. It turns out her two best friends both died. It can't be easy when you get to her age and your friends start dying off. Cynthia still turns her nose down on me, but I'm beginning to warm to that cat rather. I can't help myself, but I find her snooty demeanour rather endearing and even charming. Everything would be so perfect in my life if I didn't miss Blaine so terribly much. I think about him all the time. I wonder what he's doing. I hope Shirley's right and that he's missing me. I send my address to him on my cell phone. I know he received it, but he hasn't spoken to me for over 7 months now. There are times when I just break down in tears. Cynthia's so understanding. She still believes Blaine will come running back to me with his tail between his legs. I pray she's right.
Then it happened. It must have been about 2 o'clock in the morning, when there was an enigmatic clanging, banging sound at the front door of Shirley's home. Then I hear Blaine's loud voice shouting out, "Alicia! Alicia, are you there? It's Blaine! Alicia! Alicia!" I can hardly believe it. I must be dreaming. The next thing I know is that Shirley and I are literally dashing down the ornate sweeping staircase through the grandiose marble foyer with its low dangling crystal chandelier towards the front door. Shirley gives me a big nudge. She looks genuinely thrilled. "I told you he'd come back," she giggles. "It's your man. He's returned from his intrepid adventure. Isn't that so exciting?" Shirley unbolts the front door. Blaine is standing there, a sorry, bedraggled sight, looking like something manky that the cat dragged in. He's covered in mud, looks battle-weary, fatigued and dirty, with his overlong hair standing up on end like electric static. I run ebulliently into his arms. He holds me so tightly. I never ever want to let him go. "Is it really Blaine? Has he really come back to me?" "I love you," he whispers in my ears, kissing my forehead. "I've missed you so much. I promise you this, I'm never ever going to leave you again." "Say that a bit louder," laughed Shirley, "so that the old walls of my home can hear your promise, Blaine. Nothing ever gets past them, you know. They see and hear absolutely everything. I've been telling Alicia that you're going to come back for her. If you had your head screwed on right, that is. She's 1 in a million, this girl of yours." "All right, I'll say it louder," laughs Blaine. "I hereby do witness in front of the walls of this rather grandiose dwelling that I will never leave you again, Alicia. But boy, have I not got a story to tell the both of you that will knock your cotton socks right off." Blaine's story. I had reached a stage in my life I'd had enough. I'm sure it happens to many people. But for me, one day I got up and I knew I wanted more out of my life. I was so tired and fed up of everything being like Groundhog Day, as the drudgiest routines and responsibilities and demands of my life were so unrelentingly repetitive. It didn't help either that I completely dreaded getting up and going to work every day, doing the same boring, tedious, monochromatic job all the time that I found about as riveting as watching paint dry. Day after day, I would tirelessly turn up to work, in a mediocre jejune office with beige walls, desks littered with computers. I would sit down, drink coffee. I would listen to the scathing, coruscating remarks of my pugnacious boss,
who always made sure his voice could be heard above everybody else's, so he knew exactly what his opinion was on pretty much everything, from politics to sports games, and God help us if our opinions differed to his. Then every evening I would return home, reverentially, as if I'd been wound up like a clockwork clown. Me and my girlfriend Alicia had spent a bountiful amount of time, effort and money on our stunning, arresting loft conversion, sanding down antiques, bought on the cheap, and turned into masterpieces that gave one a sense of achievement and purpose. But once we had attained our goals and had dramatically transformed our cosy, sumptuous little den, it all seemed empty, futile, meaningless. All this effort, and for what? It was just material things. Is that what I was bursting my guts for? To buy things, and still more things, like being on an endless cycle or roller coaster of just accumulating more and more stuff. I really wanted more depth and substance, as well as purpose from my life. Not all this. It was on a Friday when I dutifully went to work that my life serendipitously took a fortuitous, unanticipated turn in the road. My boss called me into his office. "Blaine, may I have a word with you for a moment? I'm very concerned that you're arriving at work an hour late every morning. Don't think I haven't noticed that. I've also observed you leaving earlier than everybody else. It's like you can't get out of the office fast enough. And then, if that isn't bad enough, I've seen you furtively taking an extension over your lunch break. Now I'm paying you very good money. You should be applying yourself dutifully as much as you possibly can. You need to buck up, or else... Or else what? Are you threatening me, Mr. Engelman? I ask. Certainly not. I don't know where you get that idea from. I just want to know why you're not as productive as my other employers are, whom don't take off as much time as you, wherein the heart of the problem, I believe, lies. If you arrived at work on time, Blaine, and left later than the others, and sometimes worked through lunch, I believe you would be efficiently efficacious. And if you were to improve, I might even consider giving you a raise. But at the moment, your work is slowing down considerably. It's causing me a great deal of concern. My objective in this office is for everyone to be efficiently fruitful." "That's your objective, Mr. Engelman," I say indignantly, feeling the anger clawing in my chest like a scratching cat. "Mr. Engelman, for your information, I'm not a robot or a machine. I'm a human being. And like it or not, we need breaks. We need coffee, walks in the park, not staring at these bland, dreary grey walls all day. It drives the most sane among us completely bonkers." "What are you saying, Blaine? That my office is not colourful enough for you? That you don't enjoy your job?" "Enjoy your job? Of course I don't enjoy my job, Mr. Engelman. If you think anyone you employ around here is champing at the bit to get to work every morning because they can't wait to be seated on one of those uncomfortable computer chairs of yours, tapping away tirelessly all day long into a dreary computer, you're grievously mistaken, or you're smoking way too much cannabis. If you think any of us are fantasizing about drinking your wishy-washy insipid coffee that tastes like loo water and staring at your beige walls all day, you've got another thing coming. And if you want to know the bloody truth, I hate my bloody job, Mr. Engelman. I resent the way you talk to us in your condescending, stuffy manner. I hate the way you dictate what political party we should support and what football team. Frankly, none of that stuff is your goddamn business anyway, and I'm sorry, but it isn't. I hate that all of us in this office are like robots to you, producing the goods like a factory machine. That's the only thing you care about, Mr. Engelman, productivity. But do you give a damn about who we are as people? Or about our feelings? Of course not. I'm sorry you feel that way, Blaine. I would like to feel the people in this office of mine get a measure of job satisfaction from their work, and I'm quite sure they do. And of course I care about my staff. Oh, please, Mr. Engelman, give me some credit, will you? I'm not a complete idiot or moron. You care about what everybody else cares about, and it's money. It's things. If it wasn't for money, none of us would be here, and I know that for a fact. We're all in here to line our stomachs with food, to pay our bills. Not because we're passionate about our jobs. Not at all. You know what, Mr. Engelman? I say suddenly. Stuff your job. Stuff your boring, pathetic, mediocre, pedestrian job. Stuff your pay package. Stuff everything. I quit my job. Good day. I get up and storm out of the office, and when I'm out on the street with the wind blowing in my hair, I feel and taste freedom for the first time in my life, a ravenous hunger for adventure that's rising up in my belly. Before long, I find myself at the camping shop in town, buying everything I could possibly need for a solo journey. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to travel around America. Where are you going? The salesman asks me curiously. I don't know. I want out of here, that's all. Out of the dreadful, boring workplace and into the wilderness, that's what I say. I'm hankering after freedom, fresh air, stunning views, campfires. You're not the first to say that, sir, nor will you be the last. It does seem these days people want some escapism. They have a taste for adventure. They like to go exploring, to get close and personal to the natural world. And who can blame them, really? Life in the workplace these days can be onerously stressful, very demanding. People need a break from it all, just like you do, sir. It wasn't easy telling Alicia I wanted to be on my own, on this solo journey of self-discovery. I really loved her with all my heart. She was my best friend in the entire world. But in truth, I'd never envisaged her coming on this intrepid adventure with me. I don't need the responsibility of having to take care of her as well, when I'm struggling to keep my own head above water. I just need to find myself, what it is that I'm actually seeking in my life, and I need to do this on my own. Of course, she didn't take it terribly well. I was shocked to discover she'd leased the loft we had painstakingly converted for an entire year. She'd sold all our furniture that we assiduously transformed with blood, sweat and tears, and restored to perfection, in order to come with me on my journey. I told her to move on with her life, to forget about me. I had to release her. I had to let her go. I knew nothing about my long-term intentions. I didn't want her to feel she had to wait for me. I wasn't sure if I would even return. The first 5 months and 3 weeks of my solo adventure around America lived up to all my wildest expectations. I met so many vibrant, interesting, colourful characters from all walks of life, who generously gave me lifts in lorries, trucks, off-road vehicles. I sometimes did odd jobs for people to make extra cash, and I camped in wild open places, walking for many miles, through prairies, forests, meadows and mountainous trails, watching arresting sunsets, enjoying ravishing scenery, observing wildlife, and so much more. I did think about Alicia a great deal. I missed her an awful lot, but I tried desperately hard to forget about her. But some things aren't so easily forgotten. If I wasn't careful, her face would come lingering into my mind quite frequently, like a smell on the wind that you can't easily ignore. I never responded to the text she sent me, along with her recent address, where she claimed to have moved into a grand old mansion with lots of fabulous antiques and a dear old lady, who she said was quite charming. I was happy for her. I felt assured that despite leasing the loft, she was living somewhere beautiful, and Alicia appreciates beauty in every form. I guess I felt if I communicated with her, I'd give her false hope that I might just return. In truth, I had no idea what my long-term plans were, and what I would actually do. So in effect, I was writing a book with my feet every single day, not knowing what would happen on each page. For unlike my reliable, predictable daily job in Seattle, every day of my brand new life out in the wilderness was sprinkled with unexpected surprises, twists, and rather curious events. It was on the final week of my exciting, indelible adventure, although at the time I was obliviously unaware that this was indeed the case, and that I would be desirous to return home after an extraordinary, profound experience that was so outer-worldly my life would quite literally never be the same again, for I would soon discover and come to the astonishing realization that our world is not all that it may seem, and that there are anomalous things that happen in the wilderness out there that would quite literally blow your mind away. I was dropped off by a congenial truck driver with a strong Irish accent to a remote area which he described as being ravishingly beautiful, almost untouched and unfrequented by human beings. I'd rather not tell you where this undisclosed location is, but I will say this: it was transfixing. And when I say that, that is quite literally an understatement. Never in my entire life have I ever beheld such extraordinary beauty. It stretched before me. There were flowering meadows, rolling foothills, fertile valleys, desert badlands, glacial lakes, and so much more. Indeed, the lakes were so transfixing. Aquamarine in colour, they were that blue. They would shimmer in the morning light and quite literally take your breath away. Often they were surrounded by a plethora of laurel leaf willows that were magnificent to behold. There were mountains that were like great big sculptural works of art that towered up into the sky with billowing curls, rugged twists, looking masterful and imposing, as though they demanded your attention, with spectacular snow-capped peaks that looked like they'd been sprinkled with icing sugar. And if that wasn't beguiling enough, there were resplendent, sprawling boreal woodgroves filled with evergreen conifers, spruces, logpole pines, elms, larches, aspens, jack pines, and limber pines. I had lost track of dates and times. My cell phone no longer dictated and monopolized my life, and was not even charged, and I never even cared about that. But there I was on my own, alone with this remarkable scenery, and my bland, insipid, nondescript office job in Seattle, long behind me, that seemed like a whole world away, almost as if it had never ever existed. I knew the new me would never ever return to a mundane job like that again. Life was far too precious to be wasted on so little pleasure. I was happy to be out here in the wilderness alone with my thoughts, and these fabulous wide-open spaces where I could become one with the natural world. It was so liberating for me, so refreshing. I felt as if the batteries of my human-like machine were finally being recharged by the beauty, the sunshine, the fresh air, and all this wonderful freedom. I was trekking up a precipitous mountain trail, walking through a meadow and a valley and a field one day, and that was when I discovered a beguiling spot on a mountainous elevation. It was like a smooth tabletop that jutted out over the edge of the mountain, giving you the splendiferous panoramic view of the twinkling aquamarine lake in the viridescent valley below. The tabletop location was fringed by a curtain of spruce trees, so it would be easy to walk past this spot on the landscape and not even know it was actually there. It possessed these prepossessing, incredible views. For some people, the perpendicular, craggy tabletop might have certainly intimidated them with a touch of vertigo, due to the sheer, dizzying drop to the valley below, which would ultimately mean, if you fell over the edge of the bluff, you would meet with a deadly fate. Suffice to say, I couldn't believe how providential, auspicious, and exceedingly felicitous it was for me to randomly stumble across this magical location, from which fanciful dreams are surely made. I decided I would camp here for a few days, as this, without a shadow of a doubt, was a remarkable camping spot and an incredible find. On the first night I put up my tent. I prepared a fire, stacking the firewood in layers, placing dry smoking kindling under the wood to get it started. It began to spark, leap excitedly, fully ignite with energizing flames that ravenously devoured the wood. So finally I had a fire merrily crackling away near my tent, surrounded by the stones of my fire pit to keep it neatly contained. There was a stream from behind my tent, not too far away, zigzagging through this woodland oasis over sculptural rocks with a forceful jetting current and a plethora of foaming white water. The convenience of this camping placement was even more desirable for me. In truth, it was like leaving one room to take a quick trip to the bathroom, where I would plunge my large water bottle beneath the water until it was full. The water was fresh, clear, and refreshing to drink. I would return to camp, filling my pot with water, allowing it to boil away heartily on the flames. I made myself a large mug of tea with sugar and powdered milk, and then I finally boiled my bag of chicken and rice, which I ate hungrily. I have to confess, food tastes so remarkably good in the open air. I savoured every delicious mouthful. I watched the arresting sun setting enthusiastically over the escarpment. It simply couldn't wait to retire for the evening, much like myself, clearly fatigued and exhausted from a hard day of warming the earth. It set in sublime undulating folding twirls of golds, tangerines, oranges, pinks and purples. Then it melted away, rather like white chocolate, becoming mottled with grey-like marble, deepening sequentially, languidly darkening, until, as if by the flick of a switch, the sky embodied a dark velvet material, encrusted with silvery diamonds and a large white shimmering moon, of which the soft ethereal shadows danced on the lake, its gleaming surfaces twinkling with silvery ripples. For a long time I sat there so peacefully, with a cool wind blowing against my cheeks, energizing my fire still more, as the flames seemed to become more buoyant. The frogs and the crickets serenaded the night with their joyful chorus. I stared at the flames for a long while, with thoughts of Alicia dashing through my mind. What was she doing now, I wondered? I wish she was here to enjoy this experience with me. How she'd love this camping location. In hindsight, it certainly would have been better to share everything I had been through with someone I loved. She should have come along on this incredulous, awe-inspiring adventure with me. I began to think regretfully. I had robbed her of this golden opportunity, crushed her hopes and aspirations, rather like a mosquito being slapped by the hand. And for what end? I retired to my sleeping bag, and was awoken later that night to the sound of something pelting my sleeping bag very hard. The only way I can describe it, it sounded like a plethora of pebbles were being flung at my tent. I cautiously crawled out of my tent with my torch in my hand. I began scanning the immediate vicinity, but I saw nothing there. But later on in the evening I sensed something, or someone appeared to be walking around my tent. It did sound like heavy, ponderous feet, crunching pebbles, but it was so vaguely obscure, so indeterminate in my mind, that I was almost positive I dreamed it. The next morning I woke up to find that the rocks around my fire pit had been curiously scattered over the clearing. The ashes from my fire had appeared to dematerialize. I remember thinking, what the heck is going on? But I gave the matter no further thought or attention, assuming that a lone camper in the area, with a macabre, inappropriate sense of humour, who thought he was being hilariously funny, was messing around with me for his own personal amusement, having discovered my clandestine camping spot. He wanted to give me the heebie-jeebies, I'm sure, 'cause you do get some weirdos out there. Well, sorry, bro, but it wasn't going to work. Besides, I wasn't easily scared anyway. Indeed, I never engaged the matter in further contemplation, but disregarded it completely. The next night, when I returned to my sleeping bag, I got the airy sense that I wasn't alone, and in the dark shadows, something seemed to be watching me. It was such a disturbing feeling that gave me twinges of unease, accentuated by a creepy feeling that made me wonder if the events of the previous evening had been executed by an escaped convict who hid in the shadows and was intent on harming me. I mean, you heard about this all the time, didn't you? People who mysteriously went vanishing all over North America on camping holidays. I looked around the entire area with my torchlight, but I saw nothing there. That night I dreamt that a dark figure had thrown me over her shoulders in my sleeping bag. She smelt of the earth and had long flowing dark hair. She held me down with one firm arm over her shoulder, and was creeping out of my tent with a cautiousness. At first I was certain I was dreaming. No, I was certain I was dreaming, absolutely 100% sure of it. It had to be a dream. But this was far better than most dreams. It was so lucid, so entertaining, so colourful. In this dream I could smell the creature's long dark flowing hair that smelt of pine, dust and earth. I never had dreams so vivid like this before, that actually engaged smell in the dream. She carried me off, but when I awoke the following morning, I was lying in my sleeping bag, reflecting over the dream, and I glanced down at my sleeping bag and found it was covered in grass and some mud. That was rather weird. Where did the grass and the mud come from that was on my sleeping bag? Because it certainly didn't come from my tent. Once again I noticed my fire pit had been cleared away, the stones randomly scattered hither and thither. And to make matters even more bizarre, tiny twigs were arranged in a hieroglyphics-like sign, displayed like some cryptic message, outside my tent. Now I knew something had to be messing with me, having fun at my expense. Then it occurred to me, of course, I knew exactly what this was about. The revelation dawned on me with a crystal-clear clarity. There was a camper out there somewhere. He discovered my incredible camping spot and was as jealous as hell, and of course I couldn't blame him. I had found the jewel in the crown, in this magical woodland oasis. He wanted to scare me away, so that I'd bugger off and he'd enjoy this tranquil space greedily all to himself, thank you very much, with its spectacular views over the valley below. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Of course, that is what this all was about. He was scaring me from my perfect camping location. Well, it would take more than a hieroglyphic sign in front of my tent to succeed in scaring me away. That was for sure. The following night, once again, I was dreaming that I had been flung over these large shoulders in my sleeping bag. I could smell the familiar earthen scent of the hair, and then I suddenly awoke, realizing that this was not a joke. Bloody hell, something is actually carrying me. And whatever it is, it's titanic in size, built like an army tank. And when it moves, it seems to glide across the ground so seamlessly. But what the hell is it? Should I scream? Should I kick and protest? Should I make a fuss? I reflect on this for a moment. The dream I'd engaged in the previous night was definitely real. I was in no doubt about it at all. But this creature had returned me safely to my tent, which he could potentially do again. That is, if I behaved myself by remaining discreetly silent and pretending to be fast asleep. It would possibly be the safest option to go along with the charade that might be a game to this outlandish idiosyncratic creature, rather than to provoke it to anger. So there is no telling, in that circumstance, how he could react. So I pretend to be fast asleep, but my heart is pounding violently in my chest, a dime to a dozen. I can feel the thunderous vibrations. I'm so petrified I can hardly breathe. My lungs are burning. My throat feels as scratchy and dry as sandpaper. I think even if I wanted to scream, no sound would be forthcoming from my throat. It seemed to be paralyzed. The next thing I know is this ambiguous creature places me down in the middle of a grassy meadow and then glides away. Is this where I'd been put the previous night, I wonder? No wonder my sleeping bag had been so incongruously covered in grass. I quickly climb out of my sleeping bag. I'm wearing socks on my feet, but absolutely no shoes. It's quite chilly with a gentle breeze blowing. I decide I need to return to my tent quickly, collect all my things and get the hell out of here before that strange outlandish creature comes back and plays any more games with me. It's a dark night, and without my torch it isn't easy to see clearly, but the light of the silvery moon gives me an edge. I find my way back to the camping site, but a long dark hand pulls me behind the tree, covering my mouth. And that is when I see it. There's a massive creature that I know at once is a Bigfoot. I'd say he's 10 foot tall, monstrously huge, but everything about his energy is dark, hostile, malevolent, vindictive. He's absolutely terrifying. It dawns on me that the creature standing behind me, with the hand on my mouth, that took me to the meadow, is trying to help me, trying to protect me from this monster. He is moving around the tent, sniffing through my backpack, inspecting everything inside it, and even smelling my tent with flaring nostrils. I watch in unadulterated horror when he lets out this ear-piercing scream. He slams his fists into his chest and seems to stamp his feet in indignation. I sense he's looking for me, he's searching for me, and if he finds me, he will kill me. There isn't an ounce of compassion in this creature's face. Such is the pronounced level of hatred that he appears to exude. I can feel the negative energy. He storms away angrily, pounding the ground with his heavy, ponderous feet. The creature whom had been putting her hand over my mouth indicates for me to follow her, but I quickly go and get my torch and my rifle, and then I follow her. She leads me to this earthen mound. She digs away at the soil, and a human hand of a man flops out. I hear the words in my head. He did this. He hates humans. I look at the creature, my eyes focused on hers. Did you speak to me, I ask, nonplussed. In my head with words, I mean. How do you do that? The creature says to me in my head, I don't know. It's easy, but it's natural to me, like eating or sleeping. It's a great way to cross the language barrier, I find. I'm studying the creature curiously. She's a Bigfoot and definitely female, given that she has small pert breasts. She's about 7 foot tall, 600 pounds, and so much smaller in contrast to the monstrous beast I observed moments before. I notice her face is remarkably human. Her eyes are beautiful and kind. So was it you who carried me to the meadow the previous night? To keep me safe from that big Bigfoot? I ask her. She nods. I wanted to keep you safe, she tells me in my mind. He'll kill you, like he killed that man. She looks at me sadly. I tried to save the man, but he shot at me. He didn't comprehend that I was trying to save him, trying to rescue him. I suppose I do look scary. She sighs regretfully. Not to me, I assure her. You've got very kind eyes. Anyone can see by your eyes that you're kind. I will admit you scared me earlier on this evening when you flung me over on your shoulders and were holding me down with your hand. I didn't know who or what you were, so it was quite terrifying, actually. She seems pleased that I think she's not scary. You must leave this place at once, she warns me in my head. The sign, done in twigs in front of your tent, was done by him. When he finds you, he will kill you. That's what it says. He hates humans. He's after you like he was after that other man. And if he finds you, he will kill you. In a trice, it's now growing light over the forest, as day breaks over the trees, and shafts of sunlight twinkle through the branches. I'm about to scurry away, and thank this Bigfoot female for keeping me safe, when I see him. He's secretly spying on me behind a tree trunk. He moves stealthily towards us, then he swings his arms aggressively, and thunders towards me on hefty tree trunk legs. There he is. He's found me. He's found us together. And I think the two of us interacting so congenially has accelerated his anger, added fuel to the fire, for he sees the female Bigfoot as betraying his trust. His rage is insatiable. It oozes out of every cell of his body, like honey from a comb. I now know that my life is over. There's no way I can stand up to this huge male Bigfoot, who appears to be foaming at the mouth like a rabid dog. He's so large, so intimidating, so terrifying. It's rather like facing a charging, furious bull elephant in musk who is livid and intent on one thing, killing you. Your life flashes before your eyes like mine was doing at this precise moment in time, where you cannot escape the bubble you're in, like when you're in a car accident and your car lunges over the cliff face, and in that instant you know it's not going to end well for you. The situation is beyond the realms of your control. Your fate lies in the hands of God alone, for the power to salvage the situation has quite literally been expunged from you. It would seem many people in these poignant moments of time describe a peace coming over them, an acceptance, almost as if only seconds before the disaster they're resigned to their fate. On the face of it, that is exactly what happened to me. I suddenly found my thoughts became crystal clear, my mind incredibly controlled and fearless. My shaking body becomes steadied. The female Bigfoot points to a specific area on her chest and then to my rifle. She's showing me the weak spot on this male Bigfoot's body, where he can be shot with my rifle with relative ease and taken down swiftly. An Achilles heel, if you like, would be the perfect word to probably use. Needless to say, everything was happening so fast, for this Bigfoot appears to be doing an intimidating war dance, rather like the haka done by New Zealand sports teams before a game, possibly designed to intimidate their opponents. I'm not kidding when I say that that is how this male Bigfoot was behaving. It's like he's doing a war dance before he decides to kill me, and it's remarkably like the haka, with audible screams, tons and tons of squats, stamping of feet and thrusting of fists against his chest, so that it sounds like a hollow drum. In truth, he is so petrifying, there are no words to describe the measure of dominance he is exerting towards me. I immediately point my rifle at the Bigfoot, when his head is focusing on his chest and he's briefly distracted for a moment. In that second, I pull back the trigger, hitting him in the vulnerable spot in his body that had been surreptitiously pointed out to me. It isn't the location of the human heart, if that's what you're thinking. I pull back the trigger. I don't stop as I quickly unload my entire barrel into this vulnerable location. I mean, what have I got to lose? If I die at this creature's hand, at least I'll die fighting. At first the creature's eyes look as if he's been tasered. He looks that befuddled. His hands clumsily touch the open wound from the first bullet hole. He's examining the blood on his thick sausage-sized finger. He looks up at me through stupefied eyes, giving me this nonplussed, rather bemused look. For a moment his anger appears to subside, as shock overtakes him. His eyes roll back in their sockets. He slumps back on the ground, falling over onto the earthen floor, with a loud, hefty thump, as he's quite sizable. He groans, then becomes very still, with a dark glaze in his sockets. He's now staring into space like a dead fish. For a while I stare at the dead Bigfoot, unable to believe that I've actually killed this mammoth-sized creature. I did this. I've never been much of a marksman, so the accuracy of my shot surprises even me. The female Bigfoot next to me is jumping up and down like an ebullient puppy dog. I can tangibly sense her joy. She lets out a number of huge whoops. Whoop! 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 Before long, out of the shadows, 4 more dark silhouettes appear. At first, they're peering at me rather nervously behind the trees, as clearly by nature they're rather evasive and timorous, and my human presence they're not used to encountering. They all range between 7 to 8 foot tall, but none of them are anywhere near the size of this Goliath-sized creature that I'd taken down, that is completely dead. I think a mixture of curiosity, intrigue and inquisitiveness overtake the extreme shyness of these other Bigfoot, and one by one they glide towards their fallen comrade, well, if you can call him that. They are rapturously delighted to discern that the Bigfoot lying on the ground is as dead as a dodo. To my baffling amazement, one of the Bigfoot pulls out the eyes of the deceased Bigfoot from his sockets, like 2 ponderous olives. He squishes them and pulverizes them under his feet. The Bigfoot begins to kick the dead Bigfoot as hard as he possibly can, and then everybody follows on suite, as if extracting the maximum amount of revenge on him in death that they had longed to apply in life, but were clearly too intimidated to do so. They kick him with such a forceful, tenacious determination that even in a deceased state, the dead Bigfoot loses some of his buoyancy. His body flattens and looks like it's suffering from hail damage. The anger the creatures feel is palpable. It is then that I realize they are all completely terrified of this Bigfoot and the control that he exerted towards them in life. He was like an abusive father figure who beats up his children, and they're afraid to stand up for themselves and to take him down. The female Bigfoot who had rescued me from my tent every night to prevent the big bully from finding me when he began his nightly scrounge to search for me, told me telepathically that he was her partner, or in our terminology you could say her husband, and the other Bigfoots were her children. She explained that it was rare for her kind to have so many children. It would appear that the entire family loathed their draconian father, who had bullied them and ruled them with an iron fist all their lives, once nearly beating one of them to death. I watched them chattering away together in a language. I don't understand the language, but it's clear they're discussing what they will do with the body. Before long, all of the Bigfoots have gathered a large stone in their hands, and have taken mere minutes to dig a huge hole together. They throw their father into the mound, give him a few more satisfying kicks, and then throw the soil on top of him. The female told me she would never mark his grave. She was so happy he was gone. Every night I would hear happy whoops all across the valley, against the sounds of the crickets and frogs, and it would always make me smile. In the morning I would find some freshly caught rainbow trout dangling from a leather string outside my tent, which I knew was from the Bigfoots. I cooked that fish in my frying pan for breakfast every morning. It melted away in my mouth. The day I chose to leave my camping spot, the female Bigfoot and her family came to say goodbye to me. They all patted me on the back, and every one of the Bigfoots gave me something, as their way of saying thank you. I got eagle's feathers, stones, and even a nest with an egg in it. The female Bigfoot looked at me and said, in my mind, "If you have a good woman in your life, go to her. Love is never easy to find." As I'm telling you my incredulous story, both Sheila and Alicia are both staring at me with eyes agog, as they hang on to every word. Their eyes have not left my face, not even for a moment. When I first came into this grand, very elegant property, with my mud-covered clothes, I could see Sheila looked rather uncomfortable. Now it seems she couldn't care a toss. "This really happened?" she asks me in astonishment. "You mean Bigfoots are actually real?" "They are," I tell her. "Well, I never, dear, I never. It sounds that leaving your pedestrian job behind and going on an adventure like this was the best thing you could have ever done. Did you find yourself, dear? Or at least the answers you were looking or searching for?" she asks me. "You know, I believe I have. I think I found out what I really want in my life, and what I don't. One thing I know is that I don't ever want to work in a beige, mediocre office again. And another thing I never want is to be without you, Alicia," I say, taking her into my arms. "Say that again," she whispers. "I never want to be without you." Shirley's a cant. I'm staring at the strange young man who pounded on my door in the middle of the night, calling out Alicia's name. I'm wearing my dressing gown and slippers, and I meet Alicia on the landing. "It's Blaine," she says to me, her eyes twinkling from beneath sleep-filled eyes. "He's only bloody come back, like you said he would." My heart is fluttering with excitement in my chest. I couldn't be more thrilled for Alicia. I feel like a matriarch figure in Alicia's life these days, and over the last 6 months we've become incredibly close. I know how broken-hearted she has been over Blaine's absence from her life, and his failure to respond to any of her messages she sent over the months. She believed he was the love of her life, and I assured her he'd come back looking for her, if he had any sense. Now he's here, just as I'd anticipated, possibly sooner than I imagined, I hasten to say. I opened the door to this filthy man, but beneath the mud on his face and the 3-day-old stubble on his chin, I can see he's very handsome. I'd say about 6 foot tall, hazel brown hair, an olive complexion, and hazel brown eyes. He looks battle-worn and weary, rather fatigued. But the moment he lays eyes on Alicia, they light up like a lighthouse out at sea. There's no doubt in my eyes that he really does love her. I lead the young couple into the kitchen and prepare them hot chocolate. I'm about to leave them to their own devices, assuming my presence would be intrusive, and the young couple would like some space of their own, and time to themselves. But to my amazement, Alicia insists I stay and listen to this incredible story that Blaine has to tell me about his adventure. Well, when he started telling us about the Bigfoot, I knew he was telling the truth. When you get to my age, you become pretty shrewd about things, and know when you're being pulled a fast one. I couldn't believe what an extraordinary adventure Blaine had been on. I think in the wilderness he found out who he really was, and what he wanted out of life. I think the female Bigfoot, living with such a horrible bully, made him realise what a gem he had in Alicia. I must admit, when he and Alicia hugged each other and kissed, I was the one that began to blubber like a baby. They had to comfort me. "Are you all right?" Sheila says, Alicia, wrapping her arms around me. "Don't you worry about me," I say. "I'm just so happy you've come together after all this time." I think back to that radio show, and how right that therapist was. My life became a whole lot more exciting when I made one little change. That was all it took. I rented out a room, allowed Alicia into my life. Since then, Alicia has moved away. I'm glad to tell you she and Blaine got married. They're expecting their second baby in the autumn. They moved to Alaska and spent their time taking tourists on hikes around the countryside. Blaine and Alicia have never been happier. My life is no longer lonely, as I've had some characters living in that room in my home. But Alicia holds a very special place in my heart. As for Cynthia, nothing has changed with her. She looks down her nose at everyone who ever enters my property, with a disapproving air, as if, quite frankly, no one is stately enough to enter the threshold of my property, or should I say Cynthia's mansion. Some things never change. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it wasn't exactly the perfect job, but as my good old grandfather always used to say, beggars can't be choosers. And frankly, I was desperate enough to want to acquire some much-needed extra cash in hand, so I eagerly snapped up the reception job at the motel, Don's place, which let's just say was convenient good money, and was far more preferable than waiting tables in the local town. Better still, if I got exceedingly bored, I could always entertain myself by watching YouTube videos. Me and my fiancé Merlin were saving money in order to buy a property of our own one day. At the moment we were residing in his Aunt Joanne's cottage. Aunt Joanne was his mother's sister. She was ironically only 5 years older than I was. It would seem my fiancé's grandmother had been obliviously unaware that she was pregnant 25 years ago. She had falsely assumed at the time that her extended waistline and pregnant stomach was a result of menopause belly fat. One day during a yoga class, when she was doing the downward dog pose of all things, I kid you not, her waters broke. The baby came out as fast as a steam train with an efficient, painless speed. So fast, in fact, that the yoga class helped with the unexpected delivery. The ambulance never got to the yoga studio in time. Joanne was born at 7 pounds 2 ounces, without any advance warning or contractions, not even painful spasms. So Joanne was, let's just say, a late lamb, and had become more like a sister to me than my fiancé's aunt. Aunt Joanne had moved in with her boyfriend to a rather luxurious apartment in Portland. The relationship was serious, with marriage bells ringing in the background. She was reluctant to either sell or rent her cottage. She didn't fancy strangers messing up her beloved place, which she regarded as an old friend. She had asked us to man the fort for her, while she decided what it was she wanted to ultimately do with the place. We were living in this enchanted cottage rent-free for the moment, and so this was the quintessential opportunity to start saving all our money, as we were determined to work as hard as we possibly could to buy a place of our own as soon as possible. For me personally, the idea of sitting back on my laurels and doing nothing would block any door of opportunity for opening up for me. My philosophical grandfather wisely used to say, "An idle man will always miss the boat." In other words, opportunities will pass him by. Or a more commonly known expression is, "If you snooze, you lose." But they're both very apt in this regard. Joanne's cottage was a dreamy, sumptuous, cosy affair. I had clandestinely planned in my mind to have first refusal in buying her cottage. That was if she did choose to sell her cottage in the first place, which was still open to speculation. This was not something I had chosen to share with my fiancé, but let's just say I was working on him, slowly and surely, drip by drip, employing the power of suggestion to surreptitiously bring my fiancé round to my way of thinking. Another clever trick my grandfather had taught me. You feed a person a subtle idea, which they begin to think is their own. It's very clever how it works. My grandfather used to use the power of suggestion on my grandmother all the time. He'd say something like, "I love the hat Farmer Boyce is wearing. I do wonder where he got it from." He'd sow the seed in my grandmother's mind. Sure enough, like clockwork, on his birthday, he'd get a hat exactly like Farmer Boyce's, for my grandmother had contacted Farmer Boyce in person, hoping to find out exactly where he'd purchased his cowboy hat from. My grandfather would ultimately get exactly what he wanted for his birthday, but my grandmother thought it was her grand idea, so she felt on top of the world for buying my Gramps exactly what he wanted. "How did you know I wanted a hat just like Farmer Boyce's?" he would chide. My grandmother would giggle. "I don't know, it just came to my mind." I could see my clever suggestions were manoeuvring my fiancé's mind in exactly the right direction, just like I'd anticipated. I knew it would only be a matter of time before he promptly informed me about his grand objective in buying Joanne's cottage. I could see him in my mind's eye, suddenly saying, "I've got a brilliant proposition. Let's buy Joanne's cottage." I had decided that at first I would crinkle up my forehead, look rather reluctant and hesitant, and say, "I'm not sure that that's such a good suggestion." I always find my hesitancy spurs on my fiancé's audacious determination all the more. It rarely works. Joanne's old-world vintage cottage was called a frame of mind. It was over 200 years old, superbly built with very strong foundations, whitewashed walls and large open windows with yellow and pink roses trailing up the walls, and a front yard dotted with an abundance of terracotta pots bursting with hanging geraniums in a bountiful array of vibrant colours, from pinks to reds. Then in the backyard there was an orchard of apple trees scattered across the turf, along with a cherry tree and some flower beds bursting with pretty perennials. There is a very smart white wicker fence that surrounds her property, hemming it in on every side in a neat square. Her cottage overlooks the most glorious prepossessing views of undulating viridescent billowing hills that bejewel the landscape in their sculptural resplendence. Aunt Joanne's white wicker fence overlooks a farmer's field that is quite often frequented by black and white grazing cows, with sizable dangling udders that jiggle impressively as they move. On the right-hand side of the meadow is a sumptuous wood grove that is composed of tall Douglas firs, ponderosa pines and Pacific yew trees. The one thing I know about cows is they're curiously inquisitive. I learnt this lesson the hard way when I crawled under the white wicker fence one morning. I discerned what looked like a dead calf lying down in the middle of the field. I wanted to see if it was all right. It turned out that he'd just been born moments before. It was struggling to get to his feet, wobbling unsteadily on his legs. I walked with my dog Alexa through the farmer's field towards the calf, obviously to check on it. In truth, it scared me a lot, as the whole herd of cows trotted over to me, crowding around me to see my dog, a large dark poodle mix called Alexa, who looks like a big black friendly gollywog. She's all hair, which you sometimes have to pull away from her face and tie into a ponytail, or her dark button black eyes will become buried and lost beneath all that hair. I was so fired up with nervous anxiety when those cows began to close in on us. I thought they were going to trample us under their feet. They got so close and personal. But I realised they were only interested in Alexa, certainly not me. So I threw a huge stick for Alexa to catch, as way of distraction. Alexa bolted eagerly towards the stick, while the whole herd of cows ran after her. I just legged it back to the cottage, my heart thundering in my chest. I was certain I was about to be trampled to death. Alexa was following close behind me. I'm not sure why they were so interested in my dog. Needless to say, to put it mildly, there is no way I'm ever taking Alexa through a field of cows. Not a chance. I decided to accept the receptionist motel job. It's only 10 minutes away from Joanne's cottage, and I can bring Alexa to hang out in the reception area with me all day, which is an added perk, as I couldn't bear to leave her on her own all day at the cottage. Sometimes I work night shifts, alternating with the owner of the place. It really depends on the schedule, but I like having Alexa with me for company. She's reasonably well behaved, and many of our visitors enjoy fussing over her, as some of them are away from home and are missing their pets. We have a box of yummy dog treats on the reception desk for dog lovers to give Alexa a treat if they desire to do so. The owner of the motel is a congenial, easygoing, laid-back fellow called Don, who thought it would be a sweet touch to put the dog treat box on the desk, saying, "Hi, my name is Alexa. You can give me a treat if you like, and I'm not adverse to a cuddle either." It turns out Alexa has been a hit at the motel, with all the staff and guests alike. We get all kinds of people staying at the motel, many on long North American road trips that need a place to stop over for the night. But you also get the sad characters, who look like they have no choice but to stay at a motel. You can tell by their deflated body language, their hunched-up shoulders, their hang-dog expressions, that they would rather be anywhere else in the world than in a motel room. I always wonder what their story is, as why they've ended up staying in our motel. Maybe they couldn't afford the rent on their property. Maybe they've been turfed out of their house by a partner due to relationship disputes. Maybe they're homeless and treating themselves to a room for the night so they can have a bath and a comfortable bed. If you can call a bed in a motel comfortable, that is. In my opinion, there is something about motel rooms that is exceedingly depressing, but I think Don is doing very well financially, thank you very much, so he's definitely not complaining. I think it helps that the motel is situated in a beautiful part of the world, so beyond the motel there are riding trails, hiking opportunities, and so much more. For me personally, if it were me looking for a place to lay down my weary head, I would almost certainly prefer to stay at a B&B any time over a motel. But that's because I think the rooms in places like this are so mundane, pedestrian, notoriously uninspiring. I know I shouldn't say that as I work in a motel, but let's just say that's me being brutally candid with you. I had been working at the motel for a week, when a very elegant, debonair-looking gentleman strolled casually into the reception. I remember looking up from the reception desk and thinking that this man looked like a fish out of water. I think he would have discerned that I looked befuddled, with a what-are-you-doing-here kind of look on my face, which I clandestinely tried to conceal from him, with little success, I'm sure. It's a little like a pink elephant walking into your reception. It's not easy to hide an astounded look. Not to put too fine a point on it, but he did stick out rather like a sore thumb to me. I would have anticipated such a well-presented, eloquent man like him to be booking into an illustrious hotel, like the Nines or the Sentinel in Portland, not in a run-down motel such as Don's place. Sorry, Don, I mean you no offence by that. I had noticed he was driving a gleaming silver Jaguar, which he'd parked in the parking bay, which certainly upstaged all the other cars at the motel, and looked conspicuously out of place, rather like a racehorse in a field of donkeys. I think he was a gentleman, possibly in his late 40s or early 50s, very well groomed, reasonably handsome, with a boyish face, chestnut brown crew cut, hazel eyes, and a slender build. He was wearing a formal blue pinstriped suit, a smart white cotton shirt, along with a very expensive black pair of zooty crocodile skin boots that were so shiny you could possibly see your own reflection in them. The man gave off the impression that he was an affluent, successful company director, or someone of significant importance in the workplace. I felt really quite bashful, conspicuously aware that I was wearing a rather dowdy, casual pair of jeans, and a nondescript mediocre pink sweatshirt, with the logo, "I'm in the pink," written on it in gold, and my blonde hair swept away from my face in a scruffy heaped ponytail that looked a little like pampas grass. I hate it when you're made to feel ungroomed, when someone you meet is so perfectly turned out, so meticulous, so pristinely immaculate and smart, that you feel suddenly so self-conscious and scruffy. I assure you the man made me feel like a bedraggled pooch, while by contrast he was a magnificently groomed Afghan hound, with hair so smooth and silky, I felt positively overshadowed by his daunting, impressive appearance. "Hello," I said to him. "Can I help you?" I give him a bright, warm smile that he doesn't actually reciprocate, although I believe he is trying, but he only manages a twitch of his lips, as if the zygomatic major muscles of his mouth just can't reach far enough to manage a smile. The man studies me through his hazel eyes. I swear I can detect a glimmer of despondent sadness within their depths that I have seen in some of the lost, wayward souls that frequent this motel on occasion. The man smells of an expensive citrus-like aftershave, which is very pleasant. To my amazement, before the man says anything, Alexa bounds up to the unlikely stranger. Now, she's never behaved like that before normally. She remains lying in the corner of my reception desk, sleeping, unless someone chooses to approach her to give her a cuddle or a treat. But Alexa sits up on her haunches, padding over confidently towards the perfect stranger, wagging and thumping her tail enthusiastically. She sits down in front of the stranger, lifting up one of her paws, as if she wants to shake hands with him. She emits a strange sound at the back of her throat, the likes of such that I have never heard her ever doing before or since. She pats the man's suit with her paw, then she turns away, retreating to her corner spot, her head turning around once she's lying on her dog bed, her eyes never leaving the stranger, not even for a moment. It is incongruous, idiosyncratic behaviour for my dog, I hasten to say. "I'm sorry, she doesn't normally behave like this," I explained to the man. "She's a lovely dog," he says, going over to Alexa and giving her a congenial pat on the head. "Where were we? Yes, I'd like to book a room for the night, if I may." "Of course," I say, looking through the computer. "Single or double bed? Bath or shower?" I ask him. "A room with a double bed and a bathroom with a shower," he says. In normal circumstances, I would usually just hand over the client their keys for their room, giving them directions on how to get there. But on this specific occasion, I felt I had to escort the dignified gentleman to the rather seedy monochromatic jejune motel room. He looked like the kind of distinguished, lofty gentleman that would expect a first-class service wherever he went. Somehow I just didn't want to disappoint him in that regard, even though we were a lowly, rather run-down motel at the best of times. But somehow with this polished gentleman dressed in a swanky, sophisticated tailored suit, it seemed decidedly wrong to just leave him to his own devices. Suffice to say, there was something really incredulous about him that was giving me a silent, uneasy nudge. "You're booked into room 265, I said. "It overlooks a very pretty cherry tree in the yard. Would you like to follow me, sir? I'll show you where it is." "You stay there," I say to Alexa, waving my fingers warningly at her. Her dark eyes remain unflinchingly fixed on the stranger. What does she know that I don't? If I didn't know any better, I'd guess that she'd picked up on this enigmatic stranger's melancholy, like I had done. "Of course. Thank you very much," he said to me. On this occasion I made a comment about the nice weather. I cannot seem to make any meaningful conversation. My tongue is tied, my words hijacked, my thoughts spinning. What I really want to say to this gentleman is, "Are you all right? You seem so desperately sad. Would you like to talk about it?" But he's a perfect stranger. I don't even know him from Adam. There's some intrusive boundaries even I know you don't cross. But I am exceedingly bothered by this man's invisible cloak of despair that seems to swathe him like a dark thundercloud. It's incredibly pronounced, so much so that I can tangibly feel its oppressive heaviness. Has someone he loved just died, I wonder? I think that seems more than a little likely. I put the key in the lock and turn the door, inviting the man into the motel room. For a moment he stands in the doorway, staring somewhat vacantly at the large, lumpy double bed in the middle of the room, with the two side tables on either side, with their orange side lamps. It looks as if he's staring through everything, and not actually taking anything in at all. Sadly, even the uninspirational orange bed covers, Don's inefficacious, unavailing endeavours to make the rather nondescript motel rooms look a tad more colourful, are brazenly defeated and overcome by a tsunami of drabness. The brown suede bedboards that had essayed to look sophisticated at one time are blotched with grubby, oily-looking stains. It stands up proudly against a creamy wall, only accentuating the gloominess of this sombre place. To add insult to injury, bang in the centre of the wall is a rather nasty, cheap contemporary piece of artwork that looks rather as if a kid came along and haphazardly, fortuitously flung splodges of orange, brown and duck-egg blue paint on the canvas. And then they framed it. The dingy carpet smells of stale cigarettes. The grim dark chipboard cupboards, TV stand and sideboard contain a minibar, and they do little to add any style to this dingy room. Even the orange curtains hang limply on either side of the smeared window panes. They look deflated, depressed. I'm quite certain this stylish gentleman is suddenly going to spring to life like a March hare and come to his senses, getting the hell out of here, for this is no place for the likes of such a man. To my amazement, his mouth twitches, almost as if he's tempting to smile again, but is failing miserably in his endeavours. My heartstrings are pulled so hard. Why? Why is he so sad? I think to myself. This will do very nicely. It's perfect. Are you absolutely certain, sir, that you're happy with this room, I mean? Are you sure it's satisfactory for you? Because I really can recommend a stylish hotel not too far from here that you really might prefer quite a lot more. I know if Don were here, of course, if he heard me talking to this gentleman like this, he wouldn't be best pleased with me, but I really don't care. Quite sure. Thank you very much for your help. I do appreciate it. Is there anything else you need? Because if there is, you will let me know, won't you? Just call through to reception. As I walk down the staircase, returning to the reception, this bodeful, uneasy feeling hovers over me, like an irritating fly that won't abate. It begins to grow dark outside, so that the parking lot is swathed in a tenebrous darkness, while the silvery blue shadows of the moonlight are obscured by a few darkening clouds in the sky that are temporarily shrouding its light. The outside eco-friendly lights of the motel remain conspicuously on throughout the night, for passing travellers to easily locate us. I look up from my cell phone and observe the silhouette of the elegant stranger in the smart suit, retrieving a long black duffel bag from the back of his trunk. I watch him walking away, heading towards the lift. I notice he walks with purpose, a dignified deportment, but there is something about him that is still disturbing me. What on earth is a man like this doing staying in a cheap motel like ours? I return to the reception desk and begin to listen to some online YouTube videos to keep me distracted and entertained. But I'm not paying attention to any of them. My mind is entertained by the mysterious stranger in room 265 that I'd met only moments before, who for some incongruous, unfathomable reason is consuming my heedful focus. And that is when I hear the sound of gunshots going off twice. It makes me jump out of my skin. It causes Alexa to bark. I just know where it's coming from. I know where it's coming from. He hasn't. Oh, please, God, no, he hasn't. I squeeze my eyes tightly, saying, no, please, no. I'm suddenly disrupted by the shrill, intimate, ear-piercing sound of the telephone ringing. I quickly pick up the receiver. I hear a man's frantic voice on the other end of the line. I'm staying in room 266, says a man. I think I've heard a gunshot going off in the room next to mine. Come quickly. I can hear by his panic-stricken, distraught tone that he's more than a little discomposed. Thank you for informing me, I say, as if he's phoned to tell me he needs more loo rolls. I'll attend to the matter at once. My apathetic voice sounds so stoically composed and impassive, I even surprise myself. Truly, you would think gunshots going off in a motel room was a regular event for me. For a moment I stand very still, so disorientated that I don't quite know what to do, or how to even react. I hastily grab the spare key for room 265. I hightail it up the stairwell, with Alexa bounding behind me. I knock on the door of number 265. Hello, sir. Hello, sir. Could you please open up for me? Sir, could you open up? I need you to open up, sir. Is everything all right in there? I need to know, sir. Is anything all right? Is everything all right in there, sir? My hands are now physically shaking. There is no answer. I tremble as I turn the key in the lock. The bald, overweight man from room 266 is standing in the doorway watching me curiously. His face has grown as white as a ghost. He's clutching his huge belly, with his hand like a pregnant woman, almost as if he's experiencing contractions. I'm not sure you should go in there, miss, he says warningly. It might be best to just call the police. I nod at the man, but I don't listen to him. I open the door with Alexa behind me. For a moment I stand there in absolute disbelief. The man in the smart pinstripe suit is lying in a pool of his own blood. Much of it is high-velocity spatter that is sprinkled across the wall in a misty spray of scarlet droplets all over the bed. There are pools of blood everywhere. The smell of copper is very pronounced in the air. It appears the man shot himself twice, once in his leg and then in his head. So there is blood spilling everywhere. The scene is graphic, haunting. My dog bounds up to the bed. He starts licking the blood off the dead man's face. She's whimpering, trying to wake him up by pawing him, but half of his face is missing, and pieces of scalp with hair still attached to it lie across the floor, like bits of fine, fragile bone china. Get off the bed now, Alexa, I say, rushing to the toilet and throwing up violently the contents of my own stomach. This is not a scene I will ever forget. Indeed, it is indelibly entrenched in my mind for evermore. It's Deputy Sheriff Finnegan who first arrives on the scene. He asks me a plethora of questions. He takes his hat off his head, laying it on the reception desk, almost as a mark of respect for the deceased soul. His face looks ashen and grave, his soulful brown eyes regretful. It looks like a straightforward suicide. I'm very sorry, young lady, that you had to witness all that blood spatter, he says to me. Suicides are never pretty. Very, very gruesome. He pauses for a moment as the radio crackles on the side of his belt. He picks it up. I'm on my way, comes the voice of the sheriff. Is it a suicide? It would seem so, sir. The deceased's name is Jack Cunningham. He's from Portland, a CEO for a Japanese automobile company. Other than that, I don't know much about him. Has his wife been notified? Someone from the Portland police will be going over to see her now, sir.
Good, good. Has the coroner arrived yet? No, sir. He's on his way. Sorry about that, says the deputy sheriff, looking up at me apologetically. As I was saying, this cannot be easy for you, having to see such a despicable sight. I'm a sheriff. I never get over death of any kind, but suicide, it's such a tragic waste of life. So unnecessary, especially when it can be avoided. Was there anything untoward about this gentleman tonight that struck you as strange, unusual, or rung any alarm bells, so to speak?
Well, there was, as a matter of fact. A few incongruous things, actually. For a start, he was so smartly dressed. He looked affluent and successful, not the kind of person I'd expect to book into Don's place, if you know what I mean. I say, lowering my voice in case my boss overhears my scathing comments, as he's arrived on the scene, is in hearing distance of me, and is standing only feet away, talking to another officer, nodding his blonde head energetically as he talks. I did think it was odd, I continue. I mean, him booking into a place like this. I noticed there was something really off about him that grabbed my attention.
What do you mean by that?
I don't know. He seemed sad, lost even. Even my dog Alexa picked up his depressed melancholy. As she trotted over to him, she pawed him, almost as if she wanted to lift his spirits. It was like she picked up his grievous sadness, his hopelessness, his despair. It really was super weird. I wanted to say something to the man, but I knew it was none of my business. I mean, how could I possibly interfere?
Interesting fact about your dog, young lady. They're very sensitive to people's moods, you know, says the sheriff. But you're right. You can't interfere into someone else's business if you suspect they're down. It's just not done, is it? Which is a terrible pity, if you ask me.
In truth, Sheriff, I actually thought this gentleman would run a mile when he saw the motel room, but it was like he was staring through it. He just said to me, "This will do nicely," but it was like he barely noticed the room at all. I paused for a moment. Sheriff, why did he shoot himself twice? Don't you think that's peculiarly odd? Why would anyone do something so nonsensical? So crazy, I mean. If you want out of here, surely one shot to the head is all it takes to avoid any unnecessary pain.
You make a good point there. But remember, we're all very different. The human mind is not always predictable. As a police sheriff, I've seen some inscrutable behaviour in my time. But if I'm hedging a guess, I would bet he shot himself in the femoral artery to work up the courage of shooting himself in the head.
That evening I didn't go home immediately. There was so much activity going on in the motel, with crime scene tape being put up all over the place, and the coroner's van arriving on the scene to examine the body, which was then taken to the morgue for a post-mortem, just to affirm that the cause of death was indeed a genuine suicide, and hadn't been conveniently staged. It was at 5 o'clock in the morning. A woman in her pyjamas and dressing gown, along with her teenage son and daughter that looked remarkably alike, trailed behind her and came into the reception area, moments before I was about to hand the reins over to Don. I can see that the woman is distraught. Her puffy brown eyes are framed by bright red rims, and there are red blotches all over her face. The two children with blankets wrapped over their backs are no different. Their eyes are also puffy and red. They look completely mortified. I know exactly who they are, without even needing to guess. I'm Kathy Cunningham, whispers the woman. I need to see what happened. Where my husband shot himself. I take the woman affectionately in my arms, spontaneously giving her a big hug. I'm really sorry about your loss, but madam, I don't think you're allowed into that motel room. Not now. It's a crime scene, and it's very, very explicit. There's a lot of blood everywhere. My husband committed suicide. That's not a crime scene. Please, she begged. I just want to see where it all happened. Me and my children, we want to feel close to him. This was the last place he was seen alive. His energy will be there. We'll be able to feel him. Look, I say kindly, it's not pretty, as I keep saying to you. There's graphic blood all over the place. It would be better if you don't see it. It really would. The woman bursts into tears.
Look, I say to her, you've driven all the way from Portland. Why don't you come home with me? I live in a cosy cottage. It's much more comfortable than a motel, it really is. And I've got some spare rooms available for you to use. The beds are ready. It's waiting to be occupied. The crime scene cleaners will be over in the morning. Once the place is clean, Don will give me a call, and you can see the motel room for yourself. I promise you that. I'm sure that once the place is clean, you'll still be able to feel his presence, but you won't have to see all that dreadful blood. So why don't you come home with me? I'll give you a bed for the night and some hot cocoa. But my fiancé is home fast asleep, so I would really appreciate it if you would be very quiet when we enter the cottage. You all look so exhausted. You definitely need some shut-eye. If you're sure, says the woman, that's most kind of you. I don't fancy driving back home, nor do I really desire staying in a motel. When we arrive at the cottage, the 2 teenage children are so exhausted they just flop down onto the beds in one of the spare rooms and fall fast asleep. Would you like a cup of cocoa? I asked Kathy. That would be so lovely, dear. I get the sense that she needs some company, so I busy myself on the range, preparing us hot cups of cocoa sprinkled with baby marshmallows. There you are, I say, placing down a steaming cup of cocoa in front of her. Tell me, says the woman suddenly, looking at me with wide eyes, as she takes a sip of cocoa, how did my husband seem this evening, when he booked into your motel? I suppose it's rather a stupid question for me to ask. I will admit, he did seem vague. I also got the sense that he was very sad. Even my dog noticed it, I say, rubbing my foot over Alexa's large body that is curled beside my feet. Alexa here trotted right up to him. She pawed him. I think she could read his defeated energy. He must have been at rock bottom. Sorry, I didn't mean to say that. The woman bursts into floods of tears and blurts out, You're right. It's true. He was at rock bottom. I knew he was in a very bad place, but I thought we could get through everything together. We always have. I told him to go to a trauma counsellor, but he simply refused to listen. He declined even to go to a doctor to get some antidepressant medication, which I thought would be a great idea for him in the circumstances. I did try to talk to him, but he would sit there staring to space vacantly. It was as if my words were like water off a duck's back. As for the last couple of weeks, my words have simply fallen on deaf ears. The only way I can describe it is that my husband has been like an empty shell for the last couple of weeks, like a living body, absent of its soul, so to speak. I really had no idea how to get through to him, to help him, or even comfort or console him myself. But never for a moment did I think he would resort to suicide. So you think you know why he killed himself? I ask. Oh, absolutely. I do know why my husband killed himself. It's a long, rather incredulous story, but not to put too fine a point on it. My husband's identical twin was killed by a mountain lion on a footpath close to this motel. I think that's why he killed himself in that motel room. It was the closest place he could get to that footpath. I imagine he wanted to be as near to his brother as he possibly could be, where he was last seen alive. I know grief is a terrible thing, I say. It happens to all of us at some point in time. But why on earth would your husband kill himself, when he has such a lovely wife, 2 precious kids? It seems like a preposterous thing to do, if you don't mind my saying so. It is rather complicated, you see. My husband Jack was an identical twin. I know Jack loved me with all his heart, as he loved our non-identical twin kids. But the bond he had with his twin brother Kurt was absolutely extraordinary. I've never seen anything like it before. The 2 of them were inseparable, as thick as thieves they were. Let's just say I knew when I married Jack that there would be 3 of us in this marriage. Jack's mother even warned me about that. It was just that Jack and his brother were that close, like 2 halves of a whole. In all their spare time they hung around with each other. It was like they needed to be together most of the time. They were both company directors at the very same firm. Don't get me wrong. As I keep saying, Jack loved me. I don't dispute that for a single second. But he adored no one in the world more than his twin brother. He loved his twin brother more than anybody else. It was like they were so emotionally connected. If one of them was physically hurting on the foot, for example, so was the other, in exactly the same place. It was bizarre. I remember his mother saying to me once, those two cannot live without each other. You mark my words, when one dies, the other will follow shortly after. It seems she wasn't wrong about that. I asked her why she emphatically believed that. She said that they're like the perfect circle of yin and yang. One can't exist without the other. Jack would get very distressed if he sensed his brother was in any kind of trouble, and his assumptions were always spot on. I don't mind admitting that even though Jack and I shared a marital bed together, I was jealous of their friendship that he had with his brother. Sometimes it was like they knew each other's thoughts. Of course, after my two twins were born, they're non-identical, but I soon began to comprehend the unique relationship between twins a little better. I realised why Jack and his brother are so exceptionally close. Even when we were driving here tonight from Portland, my twins were desperately sad. My son said to me, "Mummy, I do understand why Dad did what he did. I mean, shot himself, because he can't live without his brother Kurt. If anything were to happen to my twin sister, I wouldn't want to be here either. I understand." Wow, that really is saying something, I agree. What happened with the mountain lion incident? I heard something from my Aunt Joanne about someone being mauled and killed by a mountain lion recently. I expect that must have been your husband's brother. Well, it is an extraordinary story that I've not shared with anyone, but it's good to get it out. I'm actually amazed that Jack even shared it with me, but he did. Do you want to hear it? Oh, I most certainly do, I say. This is the story Jack shared with his wife before he died. It had been a hard, jaded day at the office, where me and my brother were heavily engaged in some tough negotiations with some rather difficult Japanese clients who weren't making life easy for us. They'd refused to shift on the agreed price for the motor vehicles we were importing from Japan. Kurt and I were feeling disenchanted and decided we needed to cheer up our flagging spirits. So we went to Morton's Steakhouse for dinner in Clay Street, which has a plush, convivial atmosphere, and tuxedo-clad waiters with Frank Sinatra's soothing, easy-to-listen-to Italian baritone voice being played in the background, seemingly commiserating with our downtrodden emotions. Our spirits were soon lifted as we tucked hungrily into our own 24-ounce porter steak, washed down with a couple of effervescent craft beers. We decided we needed some fresh country air over the weekend. Our waiter overheard us talking about where we should go hiking. It turned out he was a keen hiker himself. He knew some of the best hiking spots outside of Portland. He eagerly told us about this marvellous hiking trail that not many people knew about, near Don's place, a motel where you could walk in the woodgrove there and feel as if you were in the middle of the American wilderness, miles away from absolutely everything. The most attractive part of it all was the location. It was only an hour's drive outside of Portland, which meant we would only be journeying in the truck an hour each way. Needless to say, the waiter sent us the travel coordinates in my cell phone. Naturally, we gave him a whopping big tip, our way of saying thank you so much. The next morning, after Kurt had picked up a picnic basket from the Flying Elephants at Fox Tower, which is a delicatessen in Portland that can make you fabulously delectable picnic lunches with delicious breads, cheeses, sausages, pastries and wines. So there we were off on the open road, driving to our intended destination, in Kurt's Discovery Sports Blue Rover. So we were listening to Portland's classic rock 92.3 KGON FM. Our moods were enervated as we drove through the beguiling countryside, past fertile valleys, stunning flowery meadows, resplendent evergreen woods. We were singing along to the music, wallowing in the prepossessing views of the landscape from the car windows. It wasn't long before we found the location of Don's motel, and further along the road we discovered a dirt road, which we drove down a considerable way. But the road was bumpy. It was throwing up prisms of white dust, which remained in the air for quite some time, while the rubber tyres were bumping over some aggressive-looking stones lying in the road, which caused even Don's hardened Land Rover to wobble and jolt precariously. Finally, we found a parking spot. We climbed out of the truck, slammed the car doors behind us, and followed an old sign with an arrow saying, "The Yorkshire Frog Trail." At first it appeared rather overgrown, but Kurt and I did not care. We were looking for an adventure. I had the contents of the picnic lunch in my backpack, and after we'd been gone for some time, I remembered I hadn't brought my rifle along with me, but we shrugged our shoulders in a nonchalant indifference I mean, why would we possibly need our rifles during the day? What could possibly harm us? At first the rocky path we ventured down was teeming with rocky appendages that jutted treacherously out of the rugged, dark earthen floor. Dappled with sweet vernal grasses, intermingled with cat's ears and red clover. Finally the trail became a narrow path that zigzagged through a vast evergreen forest that contained Douglas firs, ashes, spruces, dogwoods, and Oregon white oaks, that penciled up into the galaxy like imposing giants that seemed to gracefully swing their branches in a cool breeze. The canopy arched gracefully over our heads as the trees almost interlocked their branches together, as if they were holding hands, allowing precious prisms of sunlight to twinkle through them, peppering the umbrella-like feathery ferns in a silvery glitter, while the mosses seemed to climb up some of the trees in staircases of verdant, thick textured carpets. There were no words to describe the beauty of this intriguing place, which smelt so poignantly of pine. In this moment I rarely believed it was serendipitous for us to have found this magical sanctuary, which felt as if we were caught up in our own little galaxy, a million miles away from everything. We could hear the pretty bird song just chirruping through the forest like an orchestra of music, and then quite suddenly it stopped. Everything in the forest became so quiet, as if every tree, every bird, had become frozen in time, like a still, unflinching photograph. Indeed, it was so silent that the silence itself exuded a menacing aura that seized our attention, nudged us with a bodeful, inauspicious trepidation, as if deep within us the spirits of the trees themselves whispered a warning to us to leave now. At first the trees had been like wizened old friends, enveloping us in a warm, inviting, congenial energy that we truly appreciated. But now we felt as if we were being asked to leave by this prepossessing sanctuary. The rebellious, audacious determination within the both of us was eager to expostulate against our instincts, to defiantly take them captive, to haul them to the wayside like unwanted, discarded old boots that had served their purpose. We had come all this way to experience this glorious sanctuary, and we'd be damned if a few ambivalent, vacillating insecurities or doubts were going to rob us of this poignant, spectacular moment. We had come here with one purpose in mind, to thoroughly enjoy a hike and a picnic. And so it was we adopted a tenacious focus, a pertinacious ardour, and a spirited bulldog-like vigour. We eagerly proceeded along the pathway, the silence hanging over us like a thick, invisible, oppressive blanket, seemingly determined to demand our attention. But we refused to acknowledge her, even though her warnings kept growing louder and louder in our ears. All of a sudden, we hear a loud, ear-piercing roar. It sounds so much worse than a gas-powered lawnmower. It is so loud that we can't ignore, disregard, or brush it aside, like an annoying buzzing insect in our ears. For we know that to do such a thing would be exceedingly foolhardy. We stand there in the forest for a moment, slow to react, confused about what decision to ultimately make. For we know something very dangerous is loitering in the shrubbery there, and if we begin to run away, it might just give us chase. For even though we do not see it, we know that we are in the presence of a predator. What kind of predator, we do not know. I reach for a stick, chastising myself for not bringing a rifle with me. Now I feel exceedingly vulnerable. Now fear is invited into my thoughts like a long-forgotten stranger, eager to make her acquaintance known, or like an obnoxiously rude dinner guest, gluttonously consuming my attention with a voracious hunger, wantonly sending her waves of trepidation rolling through my blood like a tempestuous, angry sea, so that I remain frozen to the spot. Then we saw him. He was huge, a mountain lion of such gargantuan size, proportion, and stature, of the likes that I have never ever beheld before. He looked bigger and more menacing than an African lion, with paws so large that when his feet gracefully pounded the ground, the earth almost groaned under the impact. Was this some freak of nature, I wondered? How could a mountain lion be this huge? But then nature has always had her monsters, from a monster pumpkin growing in a backyard, a monster fish caught at the end of a fisherman's line, and now a monstrous-sized mountain lion. The creature's coat is luxuriously creamy, Not the normal tan colour you would expect in a normal mountain lion, which could be due to a recessive gene, although he does have the typical black markings on his tail, ear and snout. I'm not going to deny he is magnificent to behold, but he is dangerous and treacherous, and his focus is upon us. The creature moves directly towards us. I know he's about to lunge at me, but Kurt throws a stone at him. The lion growls at us, pulling back his lips to expose his treacherous canine teeth. Then he turns around to his antagonist, leaps upon him in a huge jump, knocking Kurt over on the ground. Before I can react, the mountain lion is covering Kurt's mouth and nose with his jaws. He has Kurt pressed under the weight of his sizable, substantial body. His weight alone could easily crush Kurt to death. He's suffocating Kurt. I want desperately to do something. I hear this awful scream. I wonder whether it's coming from Kurt, until I realise it's actually me that is making this god-awful commotion. I discern that Kurt is indeed dead. Once the creature is satisfied that this is indeed the case, he turns away from Kurt, his attention now focused on me. Kurt is lying across the forest floor, with arms extended and glazed eyes staring vacantly into space. I know I need to get out of here, and fast. I can't help Kurt now. But the lion is lunging towards me. The next thing I know, I'm lifted up in these huge, anomalous arms, and this bizarre creature has thrown me over his shoulders. It is screaming at the mountain lion. To my amazement, like an obedient dog, the mountain lion just darts away from this creature, dragging the body of Kurt in his jaws across the earthen floor. I'm not sure exactly what has rescued me, but I'm feeling safe, as the creature is holding me down with one firm hand, gliding so seamlessly through the forest. I realise that this has got to be a Bigfoot. He smells really nice, like the pine of the forest. Nothing vulgar or disgusting, as so often reported. I notice his hair is long and silky, with a silvery sheen. It's a silvery grey colour. The creature takes me through the forest down the trail to the parking lot, placing me safely on the ground. I know this is a Bigfoot. He looks at me sorrowfully. He knows I've lost my brother, as we are identical, so I imagine he's guessed as much. I can sense his empathy. I'm astonished by how human his face is. I notice he has dark eyes the colour of liquid chocolate. He is easily over 7 foot tall, 500 to 600 pounds, with a burly body that is built like a powerful piece of farming machinery. The creature pats me gently on the back, stands there as he watches me stagger awkwardly to the car. I hand him my backpack with my picnic stuff in it. He nods at me, but he's far more concerned about me than anything I've given him to eat. I drive away and inform the police that I was attacked by a mountain lion. "Wow," I say, "that's a most incredible story, Kathy. Did they find your husband's brother's body?" "They found bones," said Kathy, "sadly scattered all over the place. Regretfully, all his flesh had been eaten. They found the largest paw prints they'd ever seen, and some blonde hair snagged on a tree belonging to the lion, but they never found the lion. They even hired a tracker, but it was a fruitless investigation. They found nothing. My husband never told anyone about the Bigfoot that had rescued him, but he believed the Bigfoot saved his life." Kathy begins to cry. She wipes the tears from her eyes. My husband said to me, "I can't live without my brother, Kathy. I just can't. I feel dead without him in my life. I so wish the Bigfoot had left me to be smothered by that mountain lion. It would have been easier that way for all of us." "But that's terrible," I say. Kathy nods. "I've never seen my husband look so lost without his twin. That's why he came to your motel, to finish himself off. He just couldn't bear to live without his brother. The motel was the closest place to his brother he could find." The next morning I'm driving Kathy and her 2 children to the motel once I've received word from Don that the crime scene cleaners have been, but the whole room will be gutted after the incident in a couple of weeks' time. Although the crime scene cleaners have already removed the mattress, the curtains, the headboard and some of the flooring that is contaminated with blood, as it's all considered biohazardous material and has to be packed up and thrown away specially. I park my car in the parking bay, and Kathy and I stare in awe as 2 golden eagles are perching on the cherry tree directly opposite room 265, where Jack took his life. It is such an astonishing sight, and the eagles remain perched on the tree. They don't fly away when we get pretty close to them. They regard us through their golden eyes. Then they swoop up in a circle in the sky, and then fly away. Kathy looks at me in astonishment. She whispers to me, "Oh my God, they're together. That's what they're telling us. They're together. Golden eagles are Jack and Kurt's favourite birds. I mean, what are the chances of two golden eagles perching on a cherry tree directly outside the room where Jack took his life? And they're two of them together. That is a sign. I can't believe it." Kathy is absolutely astonished. She can't believe it. Neither can her children. Kathy's son, Paul, finds 2 eagle feathers on the ground, and everyone's spirits are lifted. And Don comes running out to tell us that the eagles had been waiting there for us all morning. "It is extraordinary. They've been waiting for you to come. It's definitely a sign. Oh, my word. 2 golden eagles at my motel on a cherry tree. I've never seen anything like it before in my life. Oh, my word. Well, I never. That is a sign from beyond the grave." If that wasn't strange enough, moments later a strange woman with purple hair comes bounding into the reception area of the motel. I'm not exactly sure who she is, as I didn't recognise her, but she's opening up her handbag. "I make key rings," she says, opening a brown bag and telling us all to pull one out of the bag. "For some reason I feel compelled to give you each one," she says. Kathy's key ring says, "The eagle has landed." Paul's key ring says, "Flying into the heavens." And Nim's key ring says, "Bright eyes burning like fire." I just thought it was extraordinary, as eagles have bright eyes that burn like fire. They fly into the heavens, and maybe they've landed in heaven. My key ring says, "It's a cool summer." And Ron's key ring says, "For your eyes only." It is only when the purple-haired idiosyncratic woman has left the motel we're asking each other, who the heck was that? Needless to say, we all felt Jack was reaching behind the grave, or from beyond the grave, let's just say, to tell us all was exceedingly well, and he was with his brother again. It brought the family a great measure of comfort. To cut a long story short, I'm delighted to inform you that me and my fiancé are happily married and are the proud owners of Joanne's cottage, as my fiancé woke up with a wonderful idea one morning of buying Joanne's place. I wonder where he got that idea from. All these years later, I remain in contact with Kathy and her grown-up children. Would you believe it? A wonderful man called Jack, who bore a remarkable resemblance to her late husband Jack, bumped into her serendipitously in a hotel lobby in Portland and asked her for a drink. He explained to her that he had seen her image in her dreams, something which he had no explanation for. Kathy believes her husband was matchmaking her from beyond the grave. Kathy is happily married to her new man. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I was wearing black sweatpants with my brown hair tied up away from my face in a large pigtail, as I pottered around my sumptuous new home, happily opening boxes, unpacking everything, while listening to Spokane radio news and talk. They were talking about some of the best places to eat in Spokane. I was using a sharp-bladed knife, ripping through the duct tape on the outside of the box, labelled in bright red pen, kitchen stuff. I began filling the rustic, creamy French-style cabinetry in this extraordinary open-plan kitchen with my crockery, starting with a long line of mugs on the shelves in the cabinets above the electric kettle for easy, efficient accessibility. Thankfully, the movers delivered my stuff all yesterday, dutifully unloading all my furniture in designated and assiduous spots around my new abode. So slowly and surely, it is beginning to look like home. The kitchen proudly boasts seamless white quartz surfaces that glitter and sparkle with speckles and flecks of silver, gold and red-type glitters within the quartz itself. There are smooth cream-tiled floors lined with very large Italian tiles, complemented by a stylish, smart, pale cream range oven with generous-sized gas hobs. It looks like an illustrious kitchen, the type that should be owned by a master chef like Gordon Ramsay or Jamie Oliver. And over the centrally built island there are hooks for hanging up copper pans and pots.
My china crockery has all been painstakingly wrapped in bubble wrap. I didn't want to take a chance of anything getting broken during the move. I kid you not. It's a 37-hour drive from our house in Woodley Park, Washington, well, the house that we owned before we bought this property, to Spokane. No easy stint across Washington, let me assure you of that. I suck in a deep breath. I glance around the seamless kitchen, with the green and gold textured blinds that frame the wide glass windows. I can hardly believe this place actually belongs to me and my husband Alistair. I almost have to pinch myself to believe that this is real. This is really happening. I glance out of the windows briefly, watching the rain come pelting down over the viridescent green front yard, with its pretty scattering of trees, and the man-made rocky pond with water that gurgles over high sculptural rocks and blasts down the pool below on jets of foaming white water. I smile inwardly, a great big self-satisfied smile that cannot be subdued, for the lips of my heart are stretched so far, I think I could burst with the ebullient joy that is painted within me, like the inward brushstrokes of a colourful painting. It had really been a dream come true acquiring this property against all the odds. Believe it or not, I had been desirous to live in this house on the hill in Spokane, Washington, since I was 8 years old. In those days, this house was owned by an elderly couple called Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair. Beryl Sinclair was a striking-looking woman, with silvery hair, which she wore tidied neatly away from her face in a bun, and sparkling silvery eyes. At the time, she was very good friends with my grandmother. In those days, when my grandmother was still alive, bless her soul, she lived in Spokane. I was staying with her for a couple of weeks, so she'd come to the Gables regularly, which was the name of the house, to enjoy tea with Beryl, and I would tag along. Beryl was an elegant woman, who moved her body even in her old age with remarkable grace. Her hand gestures were almost ethereal. Her back so straight she'd make a pencil look crooked. My grandmother told me that Mrs. Sinclair in her younger days had been a prima ballerina, and that a couple of her paintings on the wall done in oils of a beautiful ballerina carrying her ballet shoes in her hands and smiling into the picture were in fact pictures of Beryl painted by a prominent artist at the time, in the days when she was a dancer. Was that really her, I wondered, looking at the picture in awe. She was so beautiful back then. Age was a cruel thing, was it not, I thought, robbing one of physical beauty so unfairly. Not that Beryl wasn't attractive, of course, but gravity does have an unfortunate way of causing the skin to sag and to wrinkle rather too easily, I'm afraid. None of us will ever escape, no matter how many Botox injections or fillers we might procure. I remember asking my mother once, why do people have to get old? Why do they lose their looks when the decades pass us by? My mother seemed to think that we all needed to experience the seasons of life. Being old would help us to look more on the inside than on the out. If we were so caught up by our exterior appearance, we might bypass what really matters on the inside, lose out on fully appreciating who we are as human beings and our purpose for being here. She made an eloquent point, I thought. When I walked into the Sinclair's house for the very first time, it was love at first sight. I was completely bedazzled by the resplendence of this gloriously regal-looking property. The walls of the house hugged and welcomed me with a warm embrace, as if in some way I really belonged. Some people say that houses choose us, not the other way round. I certainly believe this to be the case, as from the moment I walked into this house, it seemed to fit me like Cinderella's slipper. There was something about the congenial Georgian home that resonated with me harmoniously, on a deeper level, even beyond the mansion itself. Perhaps it was something about the large piece of land that the house occupied that spoke to my heart congruously. The glorious colourful rose gardens framed by pristine lavender hedges, the viridescent lawns, the large apple orchards, the sprinkling of trees that peppered the lawn so gracefully. I loved everything about this prepossessing white 1800s building, with its rigid symmetry, perfect windows and door placement, all based on the golden ratio, I might add. The sheer, understated classical elegance of this remarkable building grabbed my attention, galvanized my dreams, captivated my imagination, titillated my sense of yearning. The bright white mansion sparkled against the vibrant, flamboyant, verdant greens of the countryside that were jaw-droppingly magnificent. I loved the way the bright light of the sun bounced against the house in golden shadows. The interiors were equally as arresting. There were grand sweeping marble staircases, framed by ornate curvaceous balustrades, occupying pride of place in the central foyer. High ceilings, classical columns, interesting alcoves, charming curious nooks and crannies, large bookshelves, glass cabinets, antique furnishings. I remember I was sitting with my grandmother as Mrs. Sinclair poured us tea in the finest bone china. She served us large slices of her pineapple upside-down cake, which melted in the mouth. I remember bursting out to Mrs. Sinclair. "One day I'm going to own this house, Mrs. Sinclair," I said with a broad grin on my face. I was wearing a red tartan dress that day, with white long socks and shoes, and 2 ponytails. My grandmother looked visually appalled. Her face flushed bright pink with embarrassment. Her brown eyes gave me that don't step out of line look. "Forgive my granddaughter, Beryl," she chuckled gingerly. "I think it is her way of saying that your house is very beautiful." "Oh, I don't take offence," says Beryl. "On the contrary, I'm really rather flattered. Your granddaughter taking such a shine to my home." "She's 8, am I right?" My grandmother nodded. "Yes, that's right." It was in that moment I looked up to see this woman standing in the arched doorway. She was smiling at me. She looked so different to anyone I'd ever seen before. Her dress was a Wedgwood blue colour, with a tight, well-fitted V-shaped bodice and a huge full skirt. She looked at me, gave me a wink, and glided away. "Who's that?" I asked Mrs. Sinclair. "The lady in the dark black hair, wearing that blue dress." "You saw her?" says Beryl, looking up at me in surprise. "I see her too, from time to time. She was the original owner of this house, you know." My grandmother stopped drinking her tea. "You mean you have a ghost here?" "Well, I wouldn't call her a ghost," said Beryl. "She just looks out for the house that she loved so much in life. Why, I do believe if your granddaughter saw her, that one day she may very well be the next owner of this house. Stranger things have happened, you know." There are not many things I remember about being 8, but I do remember this house that filtered regularly into my dreams. Sometimes I would have visitations in my dreams from the mysterious woman in the blue Wedgwood dress that I'd physically seen in that house all those years ago. Perhaps she wanted me to remember her and the Georgian property on the hill that one day I would surely own. Then one day it happened, as me and my husband were in Spokane visiting my sister-in-law Alice, who had become my very best friend after I married her brother James. At the time we were looking to buy a house in Spokane, to be close to Alice and her husband Carter, as we were 36 hours away by car. "I want to show you the most beautiful house I've ever seen," I told my husband, directing him to drive his sister's car to the property on the hill. To my astonishment, there was a for sale sign outside the property. I quickly grabbed my cell phone and called the estate agents at once. "Hello, Claudia speaking," came the voice of the estate agent. "How can I help you?" "Yes, hello, this is Freya MacDonald speaking. I'm phoning about the Georgian house on the hill, the Gables. I see it's for sale." "That's strange. How do you know it's for sale? It's only just gone on the market about 10 minutes ago." "Well, there is a for sale sign outside the property," I explain. "How extraordinary! That was quick work on Morag's part. She must have put the sign up a moment ago. That was very quick work for her. So you would like a private viewing, would you?" "No, I don't need a viewing," I explain. "I'd like to buy the property." There's a stunned silence at the end of the phone. My husband is making all kinds of "what the hell are you doing" expressions in the car. He's even poking me in the chest, but I willfully ignore him. I know that I simply must have this property. "Should you not first see the house?" says the woman. "It might actually be a good idea first. I know it looks good on the exterior, but shouldn't you see what you're buying first?" "I did see it inside when I was 8 years old," I say. "That was about 20 years ago." "Well, I do know the house has undergone some changes in 20 years, with the kitchen being recently renovated and modernised, but everything is very classical, in keeping with the Georgian times, of course. Should you not at least see it on the inside? It is stunning.
Before you make an offer, of course. I just think in the circumstances it just might be wise. That's not necessary, I say, asking the estate agent what the asking price is, and sighing with relief that it's what we can actually afford, which in itself is miraculous. That's fine, I say. Please will you contact the sellers, offer them the full asking price. Call me back in 10 minutes, will you? Will do so, says the agent, her voice registering bewilderment. What on earth are you doing, Freya? Says my husband. Putting an offer in on a home we haven't even seen yet. But he knew by my determined, resolute expression that there was absolutely no point in arguing with me. Don't they say happy wife, happy life? My husband lived by those rules. The phone rang back in 10 minutes. Hello, it's Claudia speaking. Very good news. The owner of the Gables has accepted your offer. She chuckles. I admire your tenacity, madam, but I wish all my house sales could be this efficacious. It was a month later, and me and my husband had moved into the property. He took me in his arms and said, Freya, I shouldn't have ever doubted you. Your phenomenal taste. This place is perfect for us. It's grand looking, but not too ostentatious. It feels like home. Why do you think I put an offer in for this house? That was the first thing I noticed when I was 8 years old, that this place felt like home. As I'm unpacking one of the last mugs into my kitchen cabinet, I see my sister-in-law's white Honda Accord driving down my driveway. It's still belting down with rain. The car wheels slosh through pools of water on the drive. What's Alice doing here, I wonder? Shouldn't she still be in California, which is a 16-hour drive from Spokane? I glance briefly at the clock on the kitchen wall. It's 9:30 in the morning. This is an early visit for Alice. I hear the car door slam. I see Alice bolting towards the door, with a small umbrella covering her head. I sense she can't get to the door fast enough. I hear her pounding on the door impatiently. So I totter over to the door and shout, Keep your hair on, Alice. I know you're excited to see me, but give me a moment. I open the door. Alice is standing there. She quickly closes her umbrella, perching it outside the door to use later if the need arises. She's wearing black yoga pants and a grey baggy sweater with black writing that reads, It's fine, I'm fine, everything's fine, written on it, which is quite ironic and uncanny, as everything about Alice's demeanour is far from fine this morning. She bolts into my house hurriedly, running through the foyer into the kitchen. She begins to put on the kettle. Oh my God, you will not believe what bloody happened to me. Look at me, I'm shaking. She stretches out her arm in front of me. She's right, it's trembling. I watch in befuddlement as my sister-in-law is spooning coffee in a mug, filling it with recently boiled water, piling 6 teaspoons of sugar into the mug, one after another, complemented by a big slop of milk. I didn't think she took sugar, but 6 teaspoons, that's crazy. Was she looking to have a diabetic coma? She's opening my tin of chocolate chip cookies without even batting an eyelid. She begins to dunk a cookie into the coffee and finishes it in 2 bites. I need some coffee. I need some to calm me down, she says, taking a big swig. Everything about Alice is so nervy this morning, almost as if she's got ants in her pants and is champing at the bit to tell me something. What the hell happened in California? Is everything all right? I ask Alice, my mind racing at 1,000 miles an hour, as I wonder what unlikely thing could have transpired in California. Alice sits down on the kitchen counter, slams it very hard with her fist, as if she's punching the whole counter, which vibrates, while the coffee in her mug swills like a tempestuous sea. You're not going to bloody believe it, girl. I can't bloody believe it myself, she says, slamming the counter again. If she's not careful, she's going to hurt her fists. The white quartz kitchen counter is hard and unyielding. So you went on your company trip to California. How did it go then? Fine. Everything went fine, she says, oscillating her arms in a dismissive gesture. You know, boring work, stuff, meetings, fancy dinners, the usual. I stayed on for a couple of days with my work colleague Esther, and we went to visit the Lausanne Volcanic State Park. I've always wanted to go there. It's an amazing place. She lowers her voice to a faint whisper. But there's something not right about that place. Something really, really off. What do you mean not right, I ask. And where is this place exactly? I've never heard about it before. It's spread across the Cascade Mountains in Northern California, in portions of Shasta, Lausanne, Plumas and Tahana counties. I think it's about 100,000 acres. It possesses a dramatic landscape of ancient old-growth forests, glacier fields and canyons covered with snow and dotted with trees and active volcanoes. It's a geometrical formation that they actually call the Ring of Fire. There are a plethora of volcanic hot springs there. You see this brown, murky water, bubbling, spitting and rising up into the ground, rather like a milky tea, or plopping mud pots. And then there's steaming south events as well. In the furthest distance, you see the formidable figure of Mount Lezen, which is considered one of the country's most dangerous volcanoes. When I spotted it first, I could see this white formation of clouds moving behind this bluish-grey-looking mountain, very fast, which was really dramatic. Needless to say, me and Esther were hiking in the foothills together. There are grassy verges there, undulating rocky hills, with rocks that jut out of the landscape in pronounced ledges. There are open clearings, silvery lakes that twinkle in the morning light, a plethora of trees, some with incredibly impressive rugged trunks. There are quaking aspen trees, cottonwoods, ponderosa pines, sugar pines and white pines, deciduous trees, along with lots of bedazzling viridescent fauna and flora. Wild flowers including irises, spotted coral woods and violets. By all accounts, it started as a normal day for me and Esther. We were walking along the footpath, and then both suddenly became overwhelmed with a disquieting feeling that something was watching us. It was the most discomposing feeling that I've ever felt before. In fact, it was so irksome that it gave me the heebie-jeebies. I look up at Esther. Her eyes have grown as wide as saucers. "Do you feel it too?" she whispers to me. "This creepy, unnerving feeling that we're being watched by something." "Something's definitely watching us," I whisper back. "Whatever it is, it's not good." That's when we see standing before us 3 lizard men. They're staring at us with huge lizard-like eyes. "What do you mean, lizard men?" I ask. "Exactly that," said Alice. "There's no other way to explain it. It's the only way I can describe it to you. Lizard men. These 3 men were wearing human clothes like hoodies that covered their heads. But like you or me, they possessed a human-shaped face. But they looked exactly like lizards. They had scales all over their face, like a lizard's, along with distinctive brown markings. And the eyes, oh my God, Freya, the eyes. They were so menacious. I've never seen anything like that before," she said. "These lizard beings were not benevolent. They were glaring at us. They were hostile and malevolent. And then in front of our eyes, they morphed into human beings, almost as if they shape-shifted in front of us. The men then shouted at us, 'You're not welcome! Leave now! Leave at once!' I assure you, after seeing what we'd seen then, we didn't hesitate to run as fast as we could. We darted away, and even when we got to the car, we didn't even stop to draw breath. We were so freaked out. I think if these lizards can shape-shift into human beings, they could easily live among us without us being aware of their presence. I ask you, Freya, what were these incongruous beings doing at Luzerne State Park? Why did they tell us we weren't welcome? Why did they tell us we had to leave? I mean, we were perfectly entitled to walk anywhere we wanted around there, were we not? The park is open to the public. Of course it is. And I asked Esther if she'd seen the lizards, before they turned back into men. And she said, hell yes, I saw everything. She described them as the most obnoxious human beings she'd ever seen. The same size and stature as a regular human being, but with reptilian scales. Very unsavoury energy. I know I wasn't hallucinating, Freya. I know what I saw. My sister-in-law's revelations have got me excited. My heart is fluttering. I'm always fascinated by ambiguous things that can't be explained. I suppose you could describe me as a seeker. I've always believed there is more going on in this world than we can hasten to imagine. I grab my sister-in-law's hands. Please, I beg her, please take me to where you saw those lizard beings. I want to see them myself. Alice pushes my hands away. Are you crazy? There was something satanic about them. I can't take you there. Look at me. I'm still trembling from the experience. Please, Alice, I beg. You know how fascinated I am by the unexplainable. My sister-in-law refuses point blank to have absolutely anything more to do with the lizard-like entities that she encountered at the park. But my intrigue has successfully worn her down. After a while she relents, finally agreeing to fly with me to California in the next couple of days, to take me to where she'd seen the lizard entities. We probably won't see anything, I assure her. I'm sure tons of people go to the park every single year. I doubt they have such incredulous experiences. Of course, in my heart, I'm hoping that I will see these lizard beings for myself. And when I tell my husband about the strange encounter, my husband suggests that his sister was hallucinating.
Don't be ridiculous, I pipe. You know Alice. She's of perfectly sound mind. She's possibly the most balanced person I know. She's so truthful. She never makes anything up. Besides, I know her friend Esther. She also witnessed the lizard-like beings.
Well, maybe there's something in the air there. People breathe it in that could have hallucinogenic qualities. After all, the place is a plethora of unusual geographic phenomena, is it not? I mean, that's the location where the mysterious ring of fire is, and all those plopping mud pots.
Yes, I know. It is possible, I say, that it was a hallucination, but I think that unlikely. I mean, 2 women both witnessing 3 men morph from lizards into human beings, who are telling them to get the hell out of there, is, in my opinion, a reliable witness. It was during that night when I went to sleep that I had a lucid dream. The woman who used to own this Georgian house in the 1800s entered my dream. She told me not to go to Lausanne Volcanic Park. They know you're coming. They want your blood. I woke up with a start the following morning, deciding to keep the strange lucid dream to myself. I didn't want my husband telling me I shouldn't go to Lausanne Volcanic Park. I knew he would see that woman in my dream as my intuition speaking to me and guiding me with a sagacious wisdom, while I knew with absolute certainty it really was the ghost of the woman in the house speaking to me, that I'd physically seen as a young 8-year-old girl. She had been warning me not to go. What did she mean, they want my blood? Who wanted my blood? And why? Was she talking about these lizard beings, I wondered? My husband is a staunch follower of Nikola Tesla's work, believing the scientist's words about our intuition were absolutely true, as Nikola Tesla said that our intuition is ahead of accurate knowledge, in other words, is always correct, and should be adhered to at all times and followed. Either way, I couldn't listen to that advice. Perhaps I'm obstinately stubborn. Well, of course I am, and that goes without saying. I was like that when we purchased this Georgian house, audaciously, resolutely determined. In the same manner, I was so tenaciously enthusiastic about going to Lucerne Park with Alice that I was not going to allow any lingering doubts to confiscate this perfect opportunity of possibly encountering a lizard being, if there was a teensy-weensy possibility that I might just have an anomalous sighting. When Alice and I arrive at the park, before we even went on our hike, she asks me, "Are you sure you want to do this?" "Of course I am," I say. "I didn't come here all this way to abandon an opportunity like this." "Well, I hope we don't see a lizard being," she says. But my husband assures me there's only a 1% chance we might have a repeat encounter. I can hear that Alice sounds optimistic about this, that her husband has successfully managed to obliterate her fears by assuring her that what happened to her that inauspicious day was unlikely to ever be repeated again. Of course, I know he's right. Those were words I didn't want to engage in my thoughts, but I knew they were profoundly true. The chances of having a repeat encounter with these lizard-like entities bordered on 0. Even so, I absolutely refused to be discouraged, so we both throw our light backpacks over our back, venture earnestly up the foothills. "Do you think you remember whereabouts you saw these lizard beings?" I ask her, after we'd been walking for quite a while. "I'm not sure," said Alice, looking around vaguely. "Everything looks the same. The rugged landscape, I mean." All of a sudden, I irrationally take charge, almost as if something invisible within me knows exactly where to go, as if I'm being guided by unseen hands. Alice described me later as being doggedly determined, with a look of absolute conviction on my face, as if I knew exactly where to go. I remember Alice's flapping like a pigeon trapped in a room, desperate to find the exit. She's panicking as she begins to sense something profoundly bizarre. She believes I'm not acting right, but even though she's overcome with a dreadful angst, she can't abandon me or forsake me. She'd never forgive herself if she did. After all, she'd agreed to accompany me on this trip, did she not? Furthermore, I was her very best friend, and I was married to her brother. Every part of her body is sounding off warning sirens like ambulances driving at breakneck speed, with their hazard warning lights flashing red and their sirens screaming loudly. She wants to hightail it away from this place.
Her heart is flapping like an agitated pigeon. She's tasting the nausea rising up in the back of her throat. She bleats like a lamb, expressing her misgivings, but she knows persuading me to go back to the car are words that will definitely fall on deaf ears, for I am clearly not remotely predisposed to listening to her ramblings. Please, please, she begs. Please, Freya. Something's not right. Let's go back to the car before it's too late. Something feels terribly wrong. I feel it in my gut. Then there we are, standing in the mouth of a large cave. How we got here, I don't entirely know, nor does Alice. One moment we're walking up a precipitous mountain trail. The next minute we're standing outside a long cave that clearly leads deep into the jagged mountain. I discern a malignant chanting sound coming from the depths of this cave. The only way I can describe it, as sounding rather like a nefarious satanic ceremony of some kind that is being conducted within the cave. I've heard similar ungodly demonical chanting music before, in iniquitous, dark, Luciferian, unhallowed, egregious movies, where devil worship is bodefully employed. Similarly, the sound is cloying. It clings to us with a tacky, doleful, oppressive energy, rather like a thick, heavy blanket you can't throw off very easily. You would think that something at this point in time would make me rise out of this murky fog, come to my senses. But common sense has eluded me, like a disenchanted friend. Wisdom has fled from me on the wings of an eagle. Intuition no longer persuades me to listen to her gentle nudges. My determination to go exploring in this cave is recruited with a pertinacious resolve that cannot be dimmed, quashed, or even suppressed, like the bright light of a blazing sun on a hot summer's day, simply refusing to slow down or to cease shining so assiduously. As we enter the cave, the first thing that seizes my attention is the uncharacteristic smoothness of the cold floor beneath my feet, that if you rub your hands, it is cold and flat, like a marble slab. How is this even possible? As we trudge deeper into the cave, a black flapping ribbon of cloud flies over us. We realize bats are everywhere. There are hundreds of them in the cave, some hanging upside down in large clusters. As we enter the cave and move ever forward, I'm shocked and bewildered to notice the chanting growing louder, louder and louder. And then we see black candles, a large table, figures wearing brown hoods, all gathering around the table. On the long table is a naked woman, but she's alive. I realize she's not even restrained by any belts or chains, but appears to be freely lying across the table, almost as if locked under some kind of mind control. In her upper thigh there is what looks like a large tap, locked into her femoral artery. The chanting continues. The hoods are flung back. Everyone bows. And that's when I see all these beings are human lizards covered in scales. Is this even real? Surely not. They turn on the tap and pour the woman's blood from the tap into the silver goblet, and they gluttonously take turns to drink this blood, bowing their heads in prayer. The woman on the table begins to fade, as the blood is literally siphoned out of her. That is when one of the lizard begins to turn around and says, "So you came. We've been expecting you. Our next supply of blood has arrived promptly on time." And in that moment, I know that this is no accident, that I was so determined to get here. I was under some kind of mind control. I try to run away, but I find I'm almost walking directly towards the table, with an obedience of note, while they toss the deceased girl onto the floor, like an old potato peeling, to make way for me. They want to drink my blood as well. I try to fight this mind control, but it's like I'm being magnetically pulled to that table, and I can't fight it. They totally have control over my mind. The next thing I know is I hear this mighty roar. The lizard beings begin to scream. They sound afraid. I find myself being carried on the back of this outlandish creature. He's running with me so fast. His movements are swift, graceful, fluid, smooth. He smells like an alpine forest. The creature runs like the wind until he's standing outside our hired car, where my cousin is sitting almost expectantly waiting. She runs towards me, giving me a huge hug. I look up to see the creature that's rescued me. It's a Bigfoot, I never knew such an incongruous creature existed in North America, but this Bigfoot is as real as you and I are. I stare at him in wondrous awe, fully aware of the fact that this anomalous, unlikely creature has quite literally saved my life, delivered me from these obnoxious lizard-like beings who feast on human blood. But they're selective about the blood they siphon, for they had sent my cousin away, telling her to leave at once. I would say the lofty, majestic Bigfoot is about 10 foot tall, 4 feet wide across the shoulder area, and 1,000 pounds easily. He's covered with a silvery hair that seems to have a bluish hue in certain lights. In any normal circumstances, seeing a creature as mighty and as powerful as this would make me run for my life, for he is so intimidating. For many, a brief glance at such a mighty beast, they would perceive their life to be in perilous danger. I am certain these lizards' lives were. This creature does not embody fear. Everything about him is benevolent, kind, congenial. His eyes are just extraordinary. I'm struck by how noble and human-looking his face is, with pronounced cheekbones, a sloping forehead, hooded deep-set dark eyes, and a powerful masculine jawline. I look at him incredulously. To my amazement, the creature is talking to me telepathically, for a majestic male voice enters my head as clear as day. "You want to know why I saved you from the lizards?" I nod my head. "I saw your friend leaving the cave. I can mind read, you know. I could read her trepidation, her fear and angst about your deadly fate. She knew you would be siphoned for your blood. You've clearly got something in your blood they need and want. That was when I knew the lizards were having a blood ceremony, so I knew someone needed my rescuing." "They're frightened of you," I ask. "The lizards, I mean." The Bigfoot nods. "They're all frightened of me. I've killed a lot of their kind, and I will do so more. They're evil to the core. They live in caves and caverns under the ground all over this world. They're despicable, evil, grotesque. They use mind control to get their victims here." "But why did they choose me?" I ask. "How did they know who I was, that I had the kind of blood they were looking for?" "Your friend here came to the park. She encountered a couple of lizard beings. They were able to look through her mind, sift through it, see if she knew anyone who had the special blood that they like. Then, using mind control, they called you from far away. That's how it works. You would find yourself having this incongruous desire to come to this park. When you arrive at the park, they lead you straight to the cave. It wasn't an accident you found it. Of course, these other beings have other ways and means of luring their prey to these caves. Not all of them, I know, but I imagine they involve some kind of mind control." "You mean they can see everyone my sister-in-law knows, and actually discern their blood type from that far away?" The Bigfoot nodded. "Yes, they can even smell it." "Thank you," I say. "Thank you. Thank you." The two of us spontaneously rush into the Bigfoot's arms to thank him by giving him a big hug. But you try getting your arms around something so big, like the huge girth of a redwood tree. It's almost impossible. "I'm glad to have been able to have helped you," I hear him say in my head. "I was at the right place at the right time. It happens once in a while. I have rescued others like yourself from this blood ceremony before, but many are not so lucky, I'm afraid. It's always done under the cover of clandestine secrecy, you see. So that's why I can't always help." I was to learn from my sister-in-law Alice that this huge lizard being told her to leave at once, or there would be deadly consequences for her. That was when she saw the Bigfoot, who had assured her in her mind that I would definitely be rescued, and that she was to go back to the car. "I believe him," she told me emphatically. "He was so big and powerful, I knew he'd take down any of those lizard beings in a heartbeat." To cut a long story short, me and my sister-in-law are still the very best of friends. I still live in my house in Spokane, Washington, and on occasion I've seen the 1800s woman's ghost. I think she looks out for me, I really do. But I've definitely come to the conclusion that there is so much more to the world than meets the eye. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Joyce and I'm from Central Kentucky. I have an extraordinary story to share with you that came from my grandfather, and so that was an incredibly long time ago. Indeed, when he was a young boy and he was living on his dad's tobacco farm in 1930. I was a young girl when I learnt to diarise all the significant events in my life, including the full story my grandfather told me when I was only 14. I was sitting by a crackling fire on a cold winter's night when he told me his amazing story, which I'm so delighted to share with you and your listeners. Bear in mind that in those days nobody knew about the hairy man or about Bigfoot, so encountering such a monstrous creature would have been incredibly shocking, and much more so than it is today. So this is my grandfather's amazing account. I grew up on a small tobacco farm in Kentucky where we grew dark fire cured tobacco, I think it was. We made enough money to have a relatively decent life. Walking everywhere was our major source of transportation, or we would travel to locations using our horse and carriage. I would walk to school with a bucket and pail with all the other children. We didn't have shops like you do today, but a local store to buy flour, rope, mop and seeds. We would have our post delivered by the postmaster, who would come to our houses riding his horse and carriage. I do vividly recall that receiving a letter from far afield was one of the most exciting, thrilling things that could ever happen to you. People from all over America loved to write and receive letters, and the longer the letter, the better. If you received a letter, you would be likely to brag about it for days on end, because it was such a big deal back then. All the people in town loved hanging out at the post office, as it was quite a social place for gatherings and for catching up on all the local gossip. And believe me, like most small towns, we invariably had our fair share of gossips. The worst was Mrs. Lewis. Some people claimed that she was secretly listening to everybody's conversations by hiding out in the nearby bushes. Her brown head of short curls could be seen bobbing up and down in the bushes as her snoopy brown beady eyes were seen peeking through the shrubbery. It would seem that she would come out of the bushes, straightening her dress, but forgetting to remove the briars that had got snagged up in her hair, that would clearly give her cunning little secret away. Everybody knew what extremes and lengths that she would go to in order to get wind of some juicy gossip. If she puffed herself up with an air of self-importance and her lips started to inflate and twitch in the corners, you would know almost immediately that she had something very scandalous to reveal, that she was literally bursting at the seams to tell you. Invariably, she knew absolutely everybody's business, which husband and wife were at loggerheads with each other, who was having a smouldering affair, and exactly who was expecting a baby in the spring. You name it, she knew it all, and she was the walking gossip column of our town, and you didn't have to part with a penny to hear the latest news, as she invariably already knew it, and she was so eager to share it with you. If you had a secret, you avoided her at every cost, because in 5 minutes, believe me, everybody in town would know your secret. My father hired and paid local men to help him manage and harvest the tobacco crops on our 400-acre farm. The tobacco crop possessed a very pungent aroma, which would waft over the valley due to the curing fire process that was late in the summer and early fall. Tobacco was cut into sticks and left to dry out in our large barns. It was hard work and very labour-intensive, so it really was a labour of love, requiring lots of work with your hands and the assistance of a mule and plough. We lived in the northern part of Kentucky, in an area that was rugged and highly timbered. The soil was not quite the same quality of the soil growing in the southernmost regions of the state. However, we were very fortunate that our tobacco plant thrived, as did our small production of vegetables. We sold vegetables and eggs to all the locals, as we harvest an excess of produce, which was more than what was needed. So that was very profitable for us. Sometimes we did direct exchanges with other farmers. For example, my father would swap chicken eggs and vegetables for cream and milk with another farmer, so we could make our own butter and cheeses. My father had an exponential amount of free-range chickens to keep the nasty grubs at bay, so roasted chicken and vegetables were invariably eaten quite regularly in our home, and without sounding very biased, my mother was the most spectacular cook. She was a very resourceful woman who would bottle pickles and preserve our food in glass bottles that were perfectly labelled so that we had plentiful supplies of food to eat during the leaner months of the year. She made pickles, jams, bottled fruits, chutneys, and the list goes on and on. There was a lovely enchanted wooded area on our land that embodied tall, majestic trees like maples, black oaks, American beeches and sourwood American holly trees that towered in the blue-grey firmament. There was a stunning trickling stream surrounded by rugged rocks that flowed through the area with a strong gushing current. It was a magnificent spot for the wary, overheated workers to take a well-needed lunch break, which they invariably always did during the heat of the day. As the serene, peaceful forest filled with cheerful birdsong and the gushing sounds of the stream provided some refreshing shade and respite from the heat of the day for the wary workers, and, of course, some peaceful tranquillity. One day one of the workers told my father that while he was eating his lunch, he watched a doe and her pretty soft fawn come to the water to drink some refreshing water, and they seemingly were unperturbed by the worker's presence. But very suddenly the doe became very anxious and afraid, and literally scampered away like greased lightning, moving incredibly fast. It was as if something had really rattled her cage, he said. I then suddenly noticed that even the pretty bird song had dissipated from the woods, and everything suddenly became incredibly still, foreboding, and very, very quiet. It seemed like there was a supernatural, evil malaise that was so profoundly overwhelming. It was not of this world. It was utterly terrifying, he said. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest intensely, and my whole body went into spontaneous, shaking convulsions. And this was before anything actually happened. You see, I just sensed, he told my father, that something was incredibly wrong, almost as if we were being watched by a pair of very evil, sinister eyes. Suddenly we heard the sound of something very hefty and hugely gargantuan racing through the undergrowth, and it thundered towards us like a horse and carriage. I was utterly terrified and started to run away as fast as I could, glancing back only for a brief second. When I looked back, my eyes grew as round as saucers, as glancing back I could see my mate being pursued by this abhorrent creature, the likes of such I have never seen before. I was so paralysed with fear that I could not move a muscle, and as the creature had clearly not seen me, I crouched and lowered my body amidst the thorny briars and thick undergrowth, not concerning myself with the vicious attacks of the sharp thorns that tore my skin to shreds. It was a small price to pay to remain hidden from this dangerous, savage, apex predator. I observed this creature with an alarming horror through the open areas of long grass, and what I saw was almost impossible to comprehend. This thing was Herculean in size, weighing at least 800 pounds and probably more, and standing erect on 2 feet at an impressive height of 8 to 9 feet, and its width was about 5 feet across. It was without doubt a bipedal, perfidious monster of some kind, with a distinct look of an ape crossed with a man. It was truly wild. It was covered all over with very long, ashy grey hair, and every part of his brawny body literally rippled with muscle. It had a cone-shaped head that seamlessly blended in to a huge pair of shoulders. I noticed that the face was long, with a skin as dark and shiny as tanned leather, a very prominent furrowed brow ridge, and very deep-set, coal-coloured eyes. This creature was the most horrifying, demonic-looking being that I have ever seen. It was as if the gates of hell had opened, and he belonged in that domain. It was powerful, imposing, and an exceedingly strong creature. The creature seized Bert with his overlong, hairy arms and threw him high in the air. I watched Bert go spinning and whirling, and then come crashing down to the ground violently in a crumpled heap, with his legs landing over his head. He was killed on impact.
I was certain of that, and I knew it immediately. No man could possibly have survived that hazardous fall. The creature tugged off Bert's head as effortlessly as we would pluck a grape from a stem. He then placed Bert's bloody, mangled head on a branch like it was a trophy of some kind. I watched as this jumbo-sized creature squatted on the ground and literally tore off Bert's forearm and proceeded to eat it like he was eating a giant chicken drumstick. I have never seen anything like it before, and he chomped Bert's arm down with a great gusto, licking his chops with huge satisfaction. He then discarded the leftover bones on the ground. I did not come back to work that whole afternoon shift because I was so terrified and glued to the ground with absolute dread. The creature did not move from his squatting position under the tree, but rested there for most of the day, obviously digesting Bert, and then he waded to the stream. I think that was to get a little bit of coolness because it was a very hot day. I was too terrified to move until he came back, and he was soaking wet and shook his hair like a shaggy dog. And then he threw the rest of Bert's body over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes, and picked up the head in his hand, bouncing it in his hands like a ball. And then he disappeared into the woods. It was only then that I had the courage to come back. Once I knew that the monster had actually gone. I have never been so terrified and petrified in my entire life as I was in those moments. My father was incredibly shocked by the workman's bizarre and outrageous revelations, and he could tell the man was rarely rattled, and so he excused him and told him to take the following day off with full pay. "You must not tell anyone about that monster that you saw in the woods," he said. "Make sure especially that Mrs. Lewis never learns about this, or it'll be around town in no time at all, and she'll have a field day with the gossip." My father reassured his worker that he would kill the creature himself with his Remington rifle once he found him. He knew that he had lost a very good worker, and he could not afford to lose another workman like this, so he knew the problem needed to be resolved, addressed immediately. If word got out to the gossips in the local community, especially Mrs. Lewis, about the monster on this land, it would be close to impossible to get anyone to work for him ever again, and his tobacco business would definitely fold. People were very superstitious in these parts, and the word about a monster getting out could potentially bring the community crumbling to its knees. So it was with great trepidation that my dad went into the woods to investigate the site where all the carnage had transpired. He came upon the large oak tree, and one of the branches was literally covered in thick blood, and pieces of Bert's skull with the skin and hair still attached clung to a little twig. My father was mortified by what he saw, but things were about to get a lot worse, because he found a humerus, ulna and radius that were cleaned to perfection and were human bones that belonged to Bert lying scattered on the ground, and he gathered them in a heap to take back to his house. He knew that his worker's story seemed to be on the money and was very accurate. It was then when he looked at the ground that he saw the most humongous humanoid footprints that he had ever seen in his entire life, and it really caused his hair to stand on end in horror, because the footprint was at the very least 26 inches long and 10 inches across, and that meant one thing: this creature was colossal. My grandfather cautiously followed the trail of this creature because drops of Bert's bloody corpse were seen on the ground, and so it was very easy to follow the path. After a while I came to a very menacing area where saplings of young plants had been twisted into arches and various peculiar shapes, and some branches had been deliberately snapped. Suddenly I saw the corpse of Bert hanging on a long branch of a maple tree, so I knew the creature must be very close by indeed, and I was proved right. You see, in my experience, the predator remains in close proximity to its prey. I could hear some whistling that sounded incredibly human-like, and so I hid behind a large cedar tree, and then I saw the monster for myself, and my workers' descriptions of the creature were not remotely exaggerated. On the contrary, they were probably under-explained. The creature was more elephantine than I could have ever imagined. In that second, I knew that my ammo was not going to be any use against this creature. If I attempted to shoot it or kill it, it would be likely to overpower me and kill me before I finished the job. I was in no doubt about that. I would have to devise a cunning plan to kill this beast in another way. I could see the beast was sharpening a stone, and he rarely was nimble with his fingers that were as thick as sausages. This creature, whatever it was, I knew was exceedingly intelligent, and that was a problem as far as I was concerned, because I needed to outwit it. I will not kid you, I was very cautious as I could, because getting away from the beast before he realized that I was there was imperative and had to be done very carefully. I was so terrified that the sound of my feet crunching twigs on the forest floor would get his attention aroused, and I couldn't afford for that to happen, because if I did, I would be next on the menu after Bert. I managed to get home very safely, and that was a very huge relief, and then I gathered my horse and carriage, and I made my way to visit Bert's widow, to tell her the tragic news about his untimely, unfortunate and tragic death. The whole family struggled to make ends meet, and life was exceedingly hard and tough for them, so it was easy for me to offer Bert's wife some kind of restitution. I offered to build her a house on 4 acres of my land that would be all hers, provided she promised not to tell anyone in the town about how Bert had tragically died on his job. I would also give her free access to vegetables and chickens to feed her entire family. The poor widow was very stoic and brave, but she wisely took my offer and did not tell a soul how Bert had been killed. On the contrary, she told people that he had died of a heart attack at her home. I did pay for all the funeral costs and gave her the arm bones of her husband to bury in the coffin, as regretfully the rest of his body was never recovered. After I had attended to Bert's wife's immediate needs, I killed 2 chickens, poisoned them, and then went to the area in the woods where I'd first seen the wild man with my own eyes. I assumed he lived in that location, and I was proved right because I encountered this enormous hut that was made with huge timber beams that are physically impossible for a human to lift, that he had piled strategically on top of each other. Inside the hut was a nest of hay that smelt hideously rank. I scattered the 2 dead chickens near the hut, hoping that the creature would eat them and succumb to a death. That was my plan, but it backfired on me. That very night in our farmhouse we were to hear the most terrifying crashing sounds and banging, and something was clearly going around our house, banging every area of our home and making the most horrifying noises that were terrifying. Also, we could hear the creature screaming at the top of its lungs, and it sounded exactly like a woman being murdered. I don't believe I've ever heard a sound so terrifying. All night the sounds continued until the dusk faded and the early morning light basked the escarpment in a warm, bright gold light. It was then that I saw the great giant gliding back towards the woods on his agile legs. He moved with such grace. That was when I finally had the courage to open the front door, and there in front of me were 2 poisoned chickens dangling on the wooden rafters. I emphatically believe the creature knew that I had tried to poison him, and he had returned the favour by bringing back the poisoned chickens, so I realised that I was very lucky to still be alive. In the end, I just left everything alone and continued with the tobacco farming business, and the workers still ate their food by that stream in the woods. But for some reason, we were never bothered again by that wild man, thank goodness, whatever he was, and that is a question that I am going to be taking with me to the grave, without ever finding the answer to that question. I will say that Mrs. Lewis did start spreading rumours that Bert had been killed by a monstrous ape in the woods, so how she got hold of that knowledge I do not know. Luckily, Bert's widow denied such a claim and told everyone in the town that he had died in front of her, and so for once Mrs. Lewis' wild allegations were dismissed by everybody. Truly, Miss Lewis was a walking tabloid paper, who in our day you would have hired as a private investigator because she took snooping to a whole new level. So this was my grandfather's account, which I hope you and your listeners found of great interest. I know personally that I did. I am absolutely certain that he encountered a Bigfoot known as the Wild Man that had a violent reputation, no fear of humans, and was known for killing people. Indeed, in our town, there were people who mysteriously disappeared, and I have my suspicion that this creature may well have been involved. I hope you enjoyed the story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.